Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening, Officer Sato. Yeah, you're right. She sighed deeply. This incident exposed a major oversight in the police department's investigations. The islands near Tokyo should have been monitored more closely. Instead, drug traffickers had exploited the police's blind spot to set up operations right under their noses. What was worse? They did it boldly, practically flaunting their activities. Sato shook her head. The traffickers really pushed their luck this time. Operating so close to Tokyo? That's insane. But, she added with a smirk, I have to admit, it was clever. No prior investigation had pinpointed Tsukekaji Island as the drug network's base. Every lead only suggested an island near Tokyo, but nothing concrete. The traffickers had played their hand brilliantly. But they still lost, Ren said softly. Yeah. And we'll make sure they regret ever trying. Sato leaned against the wall, letting out a weary sigh. At least this operation exposed their entire network, she said. Even if we got chewed out by our superiors, catching these guys makes it worth it. Ren observed her quietly. Sato Mueko wasn't pretending, her words were genuine. You have a great attitude, Officer Sato. It's not about attitude, she corrected. We got scolded because we deserved it. We didn't do our job properly. That's on us. Her honesty was refreshing. Ren found himself genuinely impressed. In this country, officers like you are rare, he said. Ugh. Stop talking like you're from my mom's generation, she groaned. You're making me feel old. Ren chuckled at her exasperated expression. Chapter 108, The Revenge of the Protagonist. Upright police officers don't tend to live long. Ren couldn't help but mutter this to himself. Sato Mueko. The Metropolitan Police Department's well-known heroine in more ways than one. She was a deeply principled policewoman, though her emotions ran high whenever she faced the murderer of her late father. But that was understandable. Revenge was a natural human instinct. The more righteous a police officer was, the more likely they were to act impulsively. Because the more they understood the depth of darkness, the more powerless they felt when trying to combat it. They saw how integrity alone wasn't enough. The higher they climbed within the system, the more they had to navigate the greasy poles of politics. And once their hands became slick with that grease, many simply stopped resisting. Sato Mueko's father had met the same fate, an unappreciated, forgotten officer. And unfortunately, her own career trajectory seemed eerily similar. She wasn't suited for desk work. Her future would likely mirror her father's, a frontline inspector, never promoted beyond a certain point. Ren wouldn't say these things out loud, of course. A person's nature couldn't be changed with a few passing comments. Sometimes, silence was the best approach. Officer Sato, I won't take up any more of your time. I'll let you get back to work. Ah, wait a second. Just as he was about to leave, Sato Mueko called out to him. She dug into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. If you come across anything like this again, give me a call. I work with Inspector Megure, so if it involves Tokyo, I'll handle it. Ren took the card and examined it. Her name, department, and work number were printed neatly on the front. A private cell phone number was written on the back. Officer Sato, you're surprisingly similar to Inspector Megure. Your way of handling things, it feels very familiar. He left it at that. Anyway, if I find anything suspicious, I'll let you know. But fair warning, I might end up calling you a lot. But if you want my help, I need one promise from you. Sato Mueko tilted her head slightly. What promise? I want a life that isn't constantly interrupted by cops asking me for help. If you can guarantee that, I'll contact you whenever I discover something important. The straightforwardness of the request surprised her. But she smiled and nodded. Of course. I promise, no one will disturb you. Her words were genuine, without a trace of official pretense. It was in moments like these that her righteous nature shone through. Good. Then if I stumble upon anything strange, I'll reach out. But you'll need to keep my name off the reports. He extended his hand toward her. Sato Mueko paused for a second, then shook it firmly. It's a deal. Yeah. Deal. After that brief handshake, they released each other's hands and parted ways. As Ren walked away, Sato Mueko couldn't help but feel that this high school boy was anything but ordinary. Now that I think about it, the club he's in is mostly made up of elite young ladies. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. Mr. Mori's daughter and that Suzuki girl are childhood friends, sure. But Amamiya Ren? A random boy with no visible background. In a club with some of the wealthiest and most influential high schoolers in Tokyo? The more she thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. And Miss Suzuki seems pretty fond of him. Her intuition as a detective kicked in. Something doesn't add up. Back in the hotel, Ren returned to the living room where everyone was gathered. Upon entering, all eyes immediately shifted to him. The situation is stable. The police have captured the mastermind, and they're sweeping the back mountain for the remaining drug dealers. Even if the drug dealers have illegal weapons, the police are better trained and equipped. The outcome won't change. He retrieved his tarot deck from Sefirah Castle and began shuffling the cards. After a moment, he drew 3 cards, the star, upright, death, upright, the world, upright. The meanings were clear, hope would prevail. An inevitable ending awaited the drug dealers. The situation would resolve in the police's favor. Everything was proceeding as fate intended. The drug dealers' defeat was a foregone conclusion. Ren sighed softly. I'm sorry, everyone. I didn't expect something like this to happen during our first club activity. Amamiya. Amamiya. Before anyone could respond, Fujiwara shot up from her seat, her eyes sparkling. Did you remember all of this? Amamiya blinked, taken aback. Remember? Yeah. This entire story? He thought about it for a moment. Well, I do remember it pretty clearly. So you didn't remember it before? Ren shook his head. No. Not until now. Fujiwara clapped her hands together excitedly. Wait. So this story is different from what you knew? It is. The story has changed. But honestly, it feels more realistic now. Fujiwara's curiosity piqued. What was the original story? Ren leaned back slightly and thought. The story I know went like this. The village chief of Tsukekaji Island partnered with some drug traffickers. They used a middleman to handle the transactions. But eventually, that middleman grew a conscience and wanted out. But he knew too much. Fujiwara frowned. So the village chief killed him? Ren nodded. Yeah. They burned down his house with him and his wife and children inside. But one child survived. The kid was sick and had been sent away for treatment. Fujiwara gasped. So now that kid is back for revenge, right? Exactly. Ugh. I knew it. Fujiwara stomped her foot playfully. This is classic revenge story material. That's just how these plots always go. But wait. What happened to that surviving child? Ren hesitated. 1 second he focused his spiritual energy, forming an image in the air. A ghostly, holographic figure appeared, depicting a mature woman with a calm but cold expression. Fujiwara's eyes widened. Wow. She's beautiful. But then she froze. Her mind replayed Amamiya's exact words, the protagonist is he. But the image is of a woman? She pointed at the floating image, her mouth falling open. Wait. You said he was the one seeking revenge. Ren nodded. Yeah. But that's a woman. Her voice rose with disbelief. Is that boy actually a girl? Chapter 109, Versatile. It's really hard to tell if that's a man. After observing the illusory figure for a while, Hayasaka, an expert in disguise and casual wear, shook her head slightly. She had only noticed the discrepancies because Amamiya Ren had mentioned that the mysterious woman was actually a man. There's a faint Adam's apple, but that's not definitive. Some women naturally have one. The breast shape looks slightly off, but that could be from plastic surgery. Physical and cosmetic fillers can create that unnatural symmetry. And then there's the height. She's much taller than the average woman. But without context, I'd have assumed she was just a statuesque beauty. Hayasaka was impressed. She dealt with disguises her whole life, but this level of detail was rare. Even with her trained eye, she would have been fooled if she hadn't known beforehand. Yeah. It's surprisingly convincing, Maria agreed. Without Amamiya's insight, I never would have guessed. But if he went to such lengths to disguise himself, his hatred must run deep. The male Avenger had clearly spent months, if not years, preparing for this. But he doesn't deserve sympathy. Ren's voice broke the silence with icy certainty. His father trafficked drugs. He wasn't some innocent victim, he was a willing accomplice to that world. And just because his family was killed by other criminals, we're supposed to feel sorry for him? Drug trafficking is a choice and anyone who makes that choice deserves what they get. His disdain was palpable. Fujiwara blinked in surprise. But he never sold drugs himself, right? I'm not denying that his revenge is justified. But I'm not going to sympathize with him either. Ren leaned back slightly. His father built a life on the suffering of others. And he didn't stop him. Didn't turn him in. Didn't cut ties. He was fine with the dirty money until it backfired. His eyes narrowed. To me, his death in the original story was a fitting conclusion. Maria tilted her head. How did he die originally? He burned himself alive after killing the drug dealers. He knew his revenge was righteous but also illegal. So after completing his revenge, he chose self-immolation as his final act. A heavy silence filled the room. Fujiwara exhaled softly. I guess that's justice, in a way. He killed monsters. But didn't want to become one. Ren nodded. Exactly. I'm not saying his pain wasn't real. Or that his rage wasn't justified. But the moment he chose revenge, he accepted the consequences. Hey, Amamiya. Fujiwara shifted closer to him. Do you really hate drugs that much? I despise them. Ren didn't hesitate for even a second. Of all the vices in the world, pornography, gambling, and drugs, I hate drugs the most. Pornography hurts those who fall into it. Gambling destroys families. But drugs? Drugs destroy entire communities. Porn can be avoided. Gambling can be quit. But drugs? Drugs never let go. He clenched his fists. Drugs don't just ruin the addict. They devour their family, their friends, and everyone they touch. I don't just hate drugs. His voice turned cold. I hate the people who sell them. Fujiwara swallowed nervously. She could feel his contempt, like a poisonous mist radiating from his very soul. And she understood why. As a child of privilege, she'd been warned about drugs her entire life. Her family drilled the dangers into her from an early age. So had the families of every other young lady present. They might not have grown up on the streets, but they knew how easily even the wealthiest could fall if they let their guard down. Hayasaka broke the silence. Honestly, I agree. My family worked for a rich family in Europe once. They had a son who got hooked on meth. He went from a straight-A student to a violent mess in months. She folded her arms. Drugs don't care if you're rich or poor. They destroy you either way. The room fell into uneasy agreement. So, what happened to the revenge seeker? Fujiwara broke the silence with a curious tilt of her head. Now. Ren considered it. Well, the drug dealers he wanted revenge on have been captured. His targets are gone. He's probably just sitting somewhere, conflicted. Fujiwara blinked. Wait. He became a doctor, right? Yeah. Maybe he became one to prevent more families from suffering like his did. But now that his revenge is impossible. Ren shrugged. I think he'll just keep being a doctor. That's not a bad outcome. Better to heal the sick than hunt ghosts. He glanced at the clock. 29 minutes since the community center raid ended. The mountain assault should be underway. Looks like it's time for me to go. He stood up. I'll head to the back mountain to check the situation. Wait, alone? Fujiwara jumped to her feet. I'll be back soon. Just sit tight and trust me. And with that, he vanished. His body dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only a faint, shimmering ripple. Fujiwara gasped. Whoa. He just disappeared. She ran to the spot where he had stood and waved her hands around. He's really gone. It was like magic. She turned to Kaguya. Kaguya, can you do that? Kaguya shook her head. I can merge with elements. But I can't vanish like that. Fujiwara stared at the empty space with wide eyes. Just what kind of power did Amamiya get? He seems way too versatile. Chapter 110, Lair in the Back Mountain. After leaving the hotel, Ren swiftly made his way toward the back mountain. Blending into the surrounding environment like a chameleon, his form became indistinct, a technique that only a Sequence 7 magician could possess. For now, he was borrowing this power through Sefirah Castle, temporarily granting himself this ability. Has my control over these abilities improved? The connection between Sefirah Castle and himself had clearly strengthened. This growing synchronization directly affected his authority over the castle's abilities. If he could raise this adaptability to a higher level, he might even break past the limitations of certain sequences. But that takes time. He was already progressing faster than expected. It had been less than 2 weeks since he obtained Sefirah Castle, and yet his grasp over its powers had grown significantly. 1, 2, 3. Ren counted softly to himself, feeling the gradual increase in his resonance with the castle. No rush. Time will handle the rest. Moments later, he arrived at the outskirts of the back mountain. The sentry post ahead came into view. The glass window of the sentry box was smeared with dried, crimson blood. The outdoor surveillance camera had a bullet hole clean through it, rendering it useless. That was fast. The assault force had moved with surprising efficiency, brutal and decisive in their actions against the drug dealers stationed here. Ren didn't even need to check the bodies to know that the shots had been precise, clean headshots, one after the other. What's with this level of aggression? Was it because of the girls' identities? Did Fujiwara and Sage Inamiya's presence rattle the higher-ups enough to push the police to act this aggressively? That seemed like the most logical explanation. He shook his head, dismissing the thought, and proceeded into the dense, shadowed forest of the back mountain. The towering trees blocked most of the moonlight, casting the area in an eerie twilight. The underbrush seemed untouched, yet Ren knew better than to trust appearances. The drug dealers here were no amateurs. Ground-level traps. Ren's gaze shifted upward toward the thick branches overhead. Much safer. A burst of crimson fire ignited beneath his feet, propelling him effortlessly into the canopy. From there, he advanced swiftly, leaping from branch to branch like a shadow. The faint glow of his flames occasionally flickered through the leaves but vanished before any ground-based observer could trace it. Sniff. Perched on a branch, Ren sniffed the air. Immediately, his face twisted in disgust. The hell is that? The stench was overwhelming, like rotting garbage left in the sun for weeks, combined with stagnant sewer water. He instinctively retrieved a mask from Sefirah Castle and strapped it on. The improvement was marginal. From his vantage point, he noticed that the advancing police unit had already donned gas masks. Mental note: stash more gas masks in the castle. A thin mist seeped from his body, forming a protective barrier that filtered the foul air entirely. Ren settled on the branch, crossed his legs, and conjured a familiar object, his diary. Balancing it on his lap, he began to write. The Metropolitan Police Department's special forces are moving faster than expected. They didn't hesitate at the sentry post, headshots all around, cameras destroyed in seconds. Could it be that the mention of Fujiwara, Shinamiya, Sage Inamiya, and Sanzan pressured them into this? If so, who? Fujiwara or Sage Inamiya seem like the most likely candidates. Fujiwara's family has deep political ties. Her great-grandfather was a former prime minister, and her father is a prominent figure in politics. Her mother's a high-ranking diplomat. That level of influence could certainly push the police into overdrive. Sage Inamiya, though. She's a different kind of asset. The strongest Maiko of the modern era, apparently. If the higher-ups truly believe she can handle supernatural threats, they might have insisted on extra precautions. Fear does that to people. It forces them to move, even when they'd rather cling to their wealth and power, but ironically, Sage Inamiya never even sought that power. It came to her naturally. I guess some people really are favored by fate. Payu. The sharp crack of a suppressed gunshot snapped Ren out of his thoughts. A drug dealer collapsed with a dull thud, blood pooling beneath him. His corpse lay sprawled in the dirt like discarded trash, devoid of dignity. Ren's expression remained impassive. A misty, gray eye appeared beside him, hovering in midair. The spectral eye rotated slightly, fixating on the lifeless body below. Sunken cheeks. Hollow eye sockets. Pale skin. Classic signs of chronic drug abuse. No sympathy. He chose that path. The special forces advanced swiftly, eliminating several more targets with similar efficiency. Ren tracked them silently from above, shifting branches with each step. Eventually, the unit reached a cluster of makeshift buildings hidden within the forest. Ren crouched low and observed the scene. The structures were made of temporary materials, corrugated metal sheets, wooden planks, and plastic tarps. Despite their haphazard appearance, the worn state of the materials suggested they'd been here for a long time. This place isn't new. It's been operating for years. Roughly 20 or 30 people had likely lived here, if not more. Chapter 111, No Humanity. The leader of the Special Forces quickly confirmed that they had found the drug dealer's base hidden in the back mountain. First, locate the surrounding surveillance. Split into 3 teams and advance from 3 different directions. The team swiftly divided into 3 units, each moving into position to ensure a synchronized, 3-pronged assault. Their objective was simple: encircle the drug dealers and eliminate all resistance. These special forces were well trained. In just a few minutes, all 3 teams had reached their designated positions. Commence the operation. With the leader's command, the 3 teams advanced simultaneously toward the target. Bayou. The soft crack of a suppressed pistol shattered the silence. Shit. We're under attack. The panicked shout from within the base sent the entire drug-dealing operation into a frenzy. However, the drug dealers, armed with pistols, were met by a coordinated volley of submachine gun fire. Tat-tat-tat. Bullets tore through the night, and the drug dealers fell in heaps, their bodies riddled with holes before they could even identify the enemy. Watch out. They're using submachine guns. The dealers had assumed their attackers were regular officers with standard issue pistols. But now they understood the truth: they were facing a professional elimination team. And there had been no warning. No time to prepare. While the surviving dealers scrambled for cover, the special forces prepared their next move. Stun grenades, ready. From 3 sides, the teams lobbed stun grenades into the drug lab's entrances. Bang. 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 The enclosed space amplified the concussive blasts. The white-hot flash disoriented the drug dealers, while the deafening noise left them writhing on the floor, clutching their ears. After a brief 5-second wait, the team stormed the building. Another round of gunfire followed. The noise ceased. The resistance was gone. The team's leader activated his communit. Command, we've secured the drug lab. We've neutralized all hostile targets. Preparing to expand our search perimeter. Understood, came the reply. Leave 2 teams behind to secure the lab. The rest of you spread out in 3-man squads and sweep the surrounding area. Orders given, the team dispersed, moving into the forested terrain to ensure no one escaped. Hidden among the branches of a nearby tree, Ren observed the scene with mild detachment. As expected. Wild drug dealers stood no chance against elite professionals. Their outdated pistols were laughable compared to the firepower these special forces carried. Still, he didn't move right away. Instead, he retrieved his diary and jotted down a few lines, just as expected. A ragtag group of drug dealers is no match for a professional tactical unit. The difference between pistols and submachine guns is like night and day. And the stun grenades? Absolutely devastating in that confined space. Honestly, this fight was over before it started. Closing the diary, he leaped from the branch. A burst of gray mist surrounded his figure, distorting his presence. The hidden officers stationed around the lab never even noticed his approach. The ground was slick with blood. Bodies lay sprawled on the dirt floor, eyes wide open in death. Amamiya Ren didn't feel much sympathy. These men had willingly destroyed countless lives for profit. Dying here was a mercy. Stepping past the corpses, he reached the lab's inner sanctum, a space separated by thick plastic sheeting. The plastic barrier was intact. To get in, one would have to tear it open. But Ren didn't need to tear anything. He retrieved a pair of gloves from Sefirah Castle, placed his palm on the barrier, and manifested a door. The ethereal doorway shimmered for a moment before swinging open. He stepped through and entered the hidden chamber. The sight inside made his stomach churn. Dozens of bodies lined the laboratory tables. Some were reduced to rotting husks, their skin sagging over exposed bone. Others were fresher, though their lifeless expressions spoke of horrific suffering. And among the dead, some were still breathing. The stench of decay was overwhelming. Only the gray mist shielding Ren's senses prevented him from vomiting on the spot. He clenched his jaw and surveyed the victims. There were men and women. Elderly individuals. And children. A wave of cold fury washed over him. The bodies of 2 small children, no older than 6 or 7, lay strapped to the tables. Their veins had been punctured repeatedly, test subjects for the drug dealer's twisted experiments. These bastards. They really have no humanity. He forced himself to look away and took stock of the surroundings. Each body had a tag beside it, marked with various chemical compositions and test results. The drug dealers had been experimenting on living humans to develop new substances. Ren's fists tightened. He examined the faint spiritual signatures in the room. The strongest resentments came from the child-sized corpses, but he could feel 4 others clustered nearby. He followed the sensation to a side table. There, laid out in a row, were the bodies of 2 adults and 2 teenagers. The entire family had been slaughtered. Ren's mind raced. Tsukekage Island was a small, close-knit community. If a family of 4 had gone missing, the parents would have raised the alarm. Villagers would have posted notices. But there'd been nothing. Not a single flyer. His eyes narrowed. These victims weren't kidnapped while walking the streets. They were likely sold out by someone they trusted. The realization deepened his disgust. He scanned the corpses again and noticed something even more disturbing. The father's body bore signs of long-term drug exposure, but his clothes suggested he'd once worked a respectable job. A police informant? Possibly. Or perhaps just someone who asked too many questions. The child on the table stirred. His heart nearly stopped. The boy's body twitched once. Twice. Then lay still again. No breathing. No pulse. It wasn't life. It was the spiritual residue of the child's trauma, manifesting as a vengeful spirit. They died terrified. And that fear had kept them trapped here. Damn it. Ren couldn't save the dead. He wasn't capable of reversing time. But he could release these spirits. He owed them that much. He knelt beside the table, extended his hands, and summoned the gray fog. The haze swirled over the bodies like a thin, protective shroud. The spirits, sensing his intent, drifted toward him. Weak, exhausted, and clinging to the trauma that had defined their final moments. You've suffered enough, he whispered. Chapter 112, God's hand, these vermins truly have no humanity, they deserve to be pinned down and destroyed. The diary was updated with these two simple lines. There were no elaborate descriptions, no vivid details. Yet, those few words felt heavier than any emotional outburst could convey. The three girls reading the diary fell into silence, each feeling an unshakable weight in their hearts. Amamiya-san must have seen something in the back mountain, Kaguya concluded, her voice soft but certain. Yeah. And judging by how little he wrote, it must have been awful. Ran instinctively understood that whatever Ren had witnessed was beyond the threshold of what he wanted them to know. He was looking for the cause of the evil spirit's birth, Nagi added thoughtfully. If he's seen it now, it must be horrifying enough that he didn't even want to describe it. The three girls exchanged uneasy glances. They were curious, but also afraid. What had he seen? What kind of scene was so unspeakably disturbing that even Ren, who had remained calm through everything, refused to describe it? The oppressive silence was broken by Nagi, who shifted her gaze towards Sage Amamiya Izumi. Izumi, as a shrine maiden, you've seen evil spirits before. She hesitated. Do you know what their birth is like? Izumi's shoulders tensed at the question. Her gaze drifted toward the window as if searching for a way to avoid answering. She knew all too well what it looked like when evil spirits were born. It was the manifestation of pure human malice. The kind of despair that could twist even the gentlest soul into something grotesque and unrecognizable. Evil spirits weren't formed from simple sadness or anger. They needed unimaginable trauma, the kind that stripped away a person's humanity and left only an echo of their pain behind. Izumi? Before she could respond, her eyes widened. Something had changed. Izumi rushed to the window, her breath caught in her throat. Her spiritual vision sharpened, and what she saw made her heart freeze. High above the island, the sky seemed to warp and twist. A massive cyclone of mist formed in midair, swirling like an unblinking eye. From within the cyclone, an invisible hand emerged. Vast, shadowy, and suffused with a suffocating sense of authority. The hand moved with deliberate slowness, fingers outstretched. The evil spirits that had been floating aimlessly above Tsukekage Island reacted instantly. They tried to flee. Tried to escape that hand. But the hand gave no mercy. It grasped them all with ease, tightening into a fist. The sky trembled. The evil spirits let out soundless, desperate wails. And then... crack. The hand squeezed, and every spirit within its grasp shattered into mist. The suffocating resentment that had lingered over the island for so long was obliterated in a single instant. As the mist dispersed into nothingness, the hand slowly retracted into the cyclone, which vanished like smoke. The oppressive weight in the air lifted. But the image of that hand remained burned into Izumi's mind. She stood frozen by the window, heart racing. That was Amamiya-sama's power. Her voice trembled with awe and fear. She had never seen anything like that before. That hand hadn't simply destroyed the evil spirits, it had erased their very essence, undoing them from the fabric of the world itself. Power beyond comprehension. Power beyond logic. Power beyond anything she'd believed possible. Izumi? Izumi, are you okay? Nagi's worried voice finally pulled her back to reality. She blinked, turning toward the others, who were now gathered around her. The window behind her revealed nothing but a clear blue sky. No one else had seen the hand. Only Izumi. Izumi, what did you see? Nagi pressed gently. Was it something terrifying? Izumi hesitated. No, she finally said. Not terrifying. Just overwhelming. Her mind struggled to find the right words. Amamiya-sama has acted. He eliminated all the evil spirits floating above the island. What? The girl's shock was palpable. Sanoko and Ran exchanged wide-eyed glances, their minds immediately recalling the swarm of spirits that had once crowded the sky. Just seeing one of those spirits had left them shaken. To imagine that Ren had single-handedly destroyed them all. Wait, Sanoko stammered. All of them? Like, completely gone? Izumi nodded. Yes. I saw it happen. Maria stood and adjusted her glasses. Izumi-san, could you explain in more detail? Izumi took a deep breath. Above the island, a massive vortex appeared. From that vortex came an invisible hand. It gathered every evil spirit on the island into its grasp. And crushed them. Completely. She shivered. The moment it appeared, my spiritual power was suppressed to the point that I could barely breathe. A godlike hand, descending from the sky to pass judgment. That. Nagi's voice broke the silence. That doesn't sound human. Izumi's expression darkened slightly. It's not, she admitted. It felt absolute. Like an authority that even evil spirits couldn't resist. Her fingers trembled as she remembered the suffocating sensation. I've never seen or heard of a power like that before. The weight of her words hung in the air. The girls' minds swirled with confusion and unease. Even if they couldn't visualize the scene, their minds filled the blanks with terrifying imaginings. They knew that if they had witnessed that moment directly, their minds might have shut down entirely. Chapter 113, You're really not afraid? This is all I can do. Glancing back at the abandoned laboratory, Ren stood still for a moment. He didn't know the identities of the people who died here, nor did he know what they'd endured in life. But death was absolute. The moment they died, everything about their past vanished. No names. No stories. Nothing left. He didn't know them. And maybe that was for the best. Leaving their lingering spirits here to wander aimlessly was pointless cruelty. At the very least, eliminating their final obsessions would give them some measure of peace. I'm probably just meddling. Ren chuckled softly, almost self-mockingly. But even knowing that, he couldn't just walk away. With a final flick of his hand, a gray flame ignited, engulfing the laboratory. When the fire burned out, Ren was already gone. The gray fog reappeared every few kilometers, making his figure blur and shift like a mirage. In less than 30 seconds, he was back near the Hot Spring Hotel. With a familiar gesture, Ren opened the spiritual door and stepped through. The moment he entered, he sniffed the air. Good. The gray fog worked. No lingering smell of blood, burnt flesh, or chemicals. Satisfied, Ren headed toward the main hall. As he approached, he caught the tail end of Sage Namiya Izami's nervous voice. The power from that hand. I've never seen anything like it. Hearing what she said, Ren's steps faltered slightly. A trace of helplessness crossed his face. She saw it. Sefirah Castle's power was on a level far beyond ordinary perception. Only individuals with extraordinary abilities could glimpse it, and even then, only under specific circumstances. Usually, without the corresponding authority, the gray fog that accompanied his power remained invisible. Unless he actively suppressed his status and someone with spiritual sensitivity happened to witness the moment of manifestation. Which was exactly what had happened. Thankfully, only Izami had the capability to perceive it. Ren shook his head with a sigh and stepped into the hall. Were you talking about me? The sudden voice startled the group. For a moment, everyone froze except one person. Fujiwara immediately jumped up and stood in front of him. Amamiya, what kind of power did you get? Ren exhaled slowly. You really aren't afraid of anything, Fujiwara-san. Why would I be afraid? Fujiwara puffed out her chest with absolute confidence. You wouldn't hurt us. And honestly, do you think anyone here is scared of you? The tense atmosphere immediately lightened as the girls exchanged smiles. Indeed, none of them were afraid. If they were, they wouldn't have gathered together to wait for him. Kaguya shook her head slightly. Sometimes, she truly appreciated Fujiwara's presence. That troublesome girl always had a way of breaking the tension in the room and lifting everyone's spirits. Compared to fear, we're actually more curious about what you saw in the back mountain that made you so angry. Not to mention, your reaction was a bit excessive. Miss Izami was scared half to death when she witnessed what you did. Based on her description, it's hard for us to imagine what could have happened to provoke such a response. Kaguya's words were reasonable, and Ren could sense the curiosity hidden beneath the concern. He hesitated for a moment before replying. The back mountain. I did see some things. He lowered his eyes. It was those things that made me decide to deal with the evil spirits immediately. My methods might have been a bit extreme. Kaguya wasn't surprised by his answer. Seeing something unbearable could easily lead to impulsive action. Amamiya-san, can you tell us what you saw? That's not something you need to know. No. Kaguya's expression turned firm. That's exactly what we need to know. Her refusal to back down was clear. Amamiya-san, you said it yourself, our fates are now intertwined. There are some things we'll have to face together, even if we don't want to. We don't need you to protect us from everything. We can help carry that burden too. Her voice was calm, but her words struck Ren's heart like a sharp blade. He sighed softly. I never denied what I said. We're connected through the diary, and our fates are indeed entangled. But this is too much for you. Kaguya shook her head. Isn't it the same for you, Amamiya-san? I have decades more life experience than you. That's ordinary life experience, isn't it? Kaguya's eyes didn't waver. But when it comes to what we're dealing with, you're just as new to this as we are. Her logic was sound, and Ren, who was never good at debates, found himself at a loss for words. Hee. Amamiya, you should just give in. Fujiwara grinned, eyes sparkling with mischief. Kaguya's the best when it comes to arguments. You won't win against her. Looking at the triumphant look on Fujiwara's face, Ren chuckled helplessly. You really are a good friend to Shinomiya-san. He shook his head. Fine. But later, after I've had a bath. Half an hour. And, Ms. Maria. No meat for dinner tonight. He turned his gaze toward the petite figure sitting on the couch. Also, Sansanin, you should sit this one out. I'm not a child. Nagi immediately stood up in protest. Izumi is my best friend. If she knows something this important but keeps it from me, I'll never let her hear the end of it. There are things I need to know too. Ren cast a questioning look at Izumi. She gave a resigned sigh and shook her head. The message was clear. It was impossible to stop Nagi from joining them. Ren let out a soft sigh of his own and turned toward Maria with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, Ms. Maria. You'll probably have to deal with a very restless Nagi tonight. Maria gave a light, knowing smile. Don't worry about it, Mr. Amamiya. This isn't exactly new. Chapter 114, Enlightenment. A half-hour break. Ren went to soak in the hot springs to relax his body and mind, washing away the exhaustion and dust from earlier. The girls also headed to the hot springs. It was clear they needed to mentally prepare themselves to hear the story about the back mountain. After both sides were ready, they gathered in the living room again. Alright, let's go over the situation at the back mountain in detail. As he spoke, Ren handed his phone to Hayasaka. Hayasaka swiftly retrieved a projector, connected it to the phone, and began projecting the images onto the screen that had been set up in the main hall. The projection appeared on the screen. The image was taken from a high vantage point, capturing the drug lab that the Special Forces had raided. The facility was quite large. Just from a rough estimate, it spanned several thousand square meters. Its exterior looked simple and unremarkable. The walls were made of white plastic with an iron sheet roof on top. However, considering that it was a drug production and research site, the simplicity made sense. It was clearly a temporary setup designed to be quickly dismantled and relocated if discovered. There was no need to invest in a more sophisticated structure. Soon, the footage showed fully armed elite troops surrounding and storming the base. The footage was exceptionally clear. Even the moments when the drug dealers were shot were captured in sharp detail. The grim reality of a drug raid played out in front of them. The room fell silent as everyone watching felt the weight of life slipping away before their eyes. People who had been moving just moments ago lost all signs of life after being struck by a few bullets. It all happened so suddenly. It all happened so naturally. They knew drug dealers didn't deserve sympathy. But knowing that didn't mean they were ready to watch a life vanish right in front of them. This was something they had to face sooner or later. Because the world they were about to step into was far more dangerous and unforgiving than the ordinary one. The loss of life was something they needed to accept. Ren didn't interrupt them. He didn't tell them to stay indifferent or to harden their hearts. There were some things people needed to process on their own. Since they had chosen to watch, they needed to find the resolve within themselves. The footage continued as the Special Forces cleared the base, methodically eliminating the remaining drug dealers. The screen froze there. This was just the beginning, Ren said. The Metropolitan Police Department's raiding team is highly competent. They showed no hesitation when dealing with the drug dealers. My guess is that someone senior in the department gave them specific instructions beforehand. Otherwise, they would have likely left one or two survivors to interrogate. But from how they operated, it was clear that eliminating these drug dealers was their primary objective. He explained this while gesturing toward the frozen image on the screen. The video resumed, shifting to the interior of the laboratory. The lab was lined with thick plastic sheeting, most likely to contain chemical odors and minimize the risk of accidents during production. Everything was designed with efficiency in mind. But now, the laboratory was littered with corpses. Unlike the earlier long-distance shots, these scenes were much closer and more vivid. The grotesque clarity turned the girls' faces pale. All of these drug dealers were addicts themselves, Ren said, his tone steady. They got into the trade for money. And to feed their own addictions. So, none of them were innocent. They chose this path knowing exactly what it meant. In pursuit of wealth and indulgence, they were willing to do anything, no matter how cruel or inhumane. Hayasaka, pause it here. Understood. Hayasaka stopped the video. Ren exhaled and turned toward the group. What you're about to see next is the darkest, most depraved side of the ordinary world. Are you sure you want to continue? This was Ren's final warning. Kaguya's expression was grim. She had never witnessed such a scene in person before. As a sheltered young lady who grew up in a privileged environment, she had always been kept away from such brutal realities. But now, it was happening right in front of her eyes and even more horrifying scenes were yet to come. Still, she gritted her teeth and stood firm. Amamiya, this is our collective decision. Maybe the scenes that follow will push us beyond our limits, but this is something we have to face. Since stepping into the mysterious world, we've gained more knowledge about reality. And sooner or later, we'll encounter situations like this again. That's why, no matter what, we have to accept these truths we've never faced before. Ren recognized Kaguya's resolve. Her rationality had guided her to this decision. She understood that this was a necessary experience, and she was prepared to endure it. But what about the others? His gaze shifted to Sanoko and Ran. When Sanoko noticed Ran looking at her, her face turned pale, but she straightened her back and met his gaze. Ren-kun, I'm the same. I made this decision myself, and I have to accept the consequences. Ran, who was usually the most timid when it came to these things, hugged her arms tightly. I feel the same way as Sanoko. There'll be more situations like this in the future. If we can't accept it now, it'll only become more dangerous later. So, I won't be left behind. Ren gave a slight nod, acknowledging their determination. Finally, his gaze landed on the youngest of the group. Nagi. You don't need to. You don't have to say it, Nagi interrupted, raising a hand to stop him. Her face was pale. The sight of so many real, lifeless bodies had shaken her. This wasn't a horror movie with fake props, everything she saw was real. My mom chose this path. Maybe she was lucky. But I know I don't have that same luck. If I can't even endure this, I'll never be able to move forward. Everyone had made up their minds. The atmosphere was heavy with determination. And then... Amamiya, I'm scared. The tension shattered in an instant. Fujiwara's fearful voice broke the silence. The others turned toward her, their expressions blank as they processed the sudden shift in mood. Ignoring the collective stares of death, Fujiwara scrambled to sit beside Ren. So, please let me hold on to you. She pleaded. I'm scared I won't be able to handle it otherwise. You know you can't handle it, yet you're still insisting on watching? Ren sighed. If you're that scared, you don't have to watch. No way. Chika immediately refused. She tried to stretch her neck and act brave, but her body trembled so much that it was impossible to take her seriously. Kaguya's watching it, so I can't back down. She declared. If I give up now, how can I call myself Kaguya's best friend? Hearing that, Kaguya was momentarily touched. But when she saw Fujiwara clinging to Ren's arm like a frightened child, her entire body practically glued to his side, that fleeting warmth disappeared without a trace. Annoyance surged through her chest for reasons she couldn't quite explain. Chapter 115, vomited Ren, who was being held, felt slightly stiff. However, he could clearly sense Fujiwara Chika's fear through her trembling. She was terrified, so much so that her body wouldn't stop shaking. Yet, despite being scared to death, she was forcing herself to watch. Ren sighed softly. Hayasaka-san, continue. Understood. Hayasaka gave a slight nod and resumed the video. The scene transitioned to the basement of the laboratory. A confined, enclosed space. The entrance was sealed off with thick plastic sheeting. Everyone knew instinctively, this was the critical part. They held their breath and watched in silence. The camera moved past the plastic barrier and into the underground lab. As the lights turned on, the interior was revealed. The girls couldn't help but cover their mouths. What greeted their eyes were dozens of lab tables, each occupied by a corpse. The victims spanned different ages. There were elderly individuals, middle-aged men and women, and even children who appeared no older than 10. All of them were strapped to the tables. The deep marks on their wrists and ankles painted a vivid picture of the unimaginable agony they endured before death. Their faces were frozen in expressions of sheer horror. Numerous needle marks were visible on their bodies. It wasn't hard to imagine what kind of experiments these drug dealers had conducted on them. The more emotionally sensitive members of the group reached their limits. Ugh! Ran and Sanoko felt a powerful wave of nausea crash over them. They scrambled for the trash cans that had been prepared beforehand. Ugh! Their stomachs revolted, and they vomited uncontrollably into the bins. The sight, the stench, the implication of what had occurred in that lab overwhelmed them. As Ran and Sanoko lost control, the others followed. One by one, each girl grabbed a nearby trash can and vomited as their bodies reacted to the trauma. Ren felt Chika's trembling intensify. Without a word, he extended his hand and used his abilities to pull a trash can from across the room, placing it in front of her. Thank you. Ugh. Her gratitude was cut short as she bent forward and emptied her stomach. See? I told you it was better not to watch. Even Ren himself felt uncomfortable looking at the horrific scene. Those individuals on the lab tables had become addicts due to the experiments conducted by the drug dealers. Their endless suffering had planted a seed of hatred so strong that many of their souls had likely turned into malevolent spirits after death. The true perpetrators of these crimes were well known to these spirits. But because the village chief hadn't been present at the back mountain base, those vengeful spirits remained trapped above the island, unable to exact their revenge. Ren gently turned to the side and began patting Chika's back to help ease her nausea. But in such situations, there was no way to stop vomiting until their stomachs were completely emptied. The only one who seemed relatively stable was Izumi. Her eyes burned with fury. But not fear. It was clear she'd witnessed similarly horrific scenes before. Everyone else was visibly shaken. Even Kaguya, who was usually rational and composed, and Maria, who always maintained an air of maturity, were overcome by the shock. No one had been spared. After ensuring Chika could manage on her own for a moment, Ren stood up and walked over to grab some tissues. He returned, handing a few sheets to Chika. "Thank you." Chika accepted the tissues but immediately bent back over the trash can as another wave of nausea hit her. The room remained filled with the sound of retching for another half a minute. Not because the trauma had passed but simply because there was nothing left in their stomachs to expel. The girls wiped their mouths with tissues, their faces pale and exhausted. They all looked utterly drained. But compared to the violent sickness from earlier, they now seemed slightly better. Even children weren't spared. Kaguya's voice was cold and trembling. She had just witnessed the darkest depths of human depravity. Drug dealers who would strap children barely 10 years old to lab tables for their grotesque experiments had no right to live. But then a thought struck her. "Wait. Amamiya-sama," she said, turning toward him. "Tsukekage Island isn't that big. How did the disappearance of these children go unnoticed?" Ren didn't answer. Instead, he silently raised a hand and pointed towards something on the projected screen. Kaguya was momentarily stunned. But she quickly grasped the implication. Her gaze shifted toward the frozen image on the projection, her expression turning complicated. It wasn't that the parents of the missing children didn't care about their disappearance. They simply never had the chance to. The drug dealers had already taken control of them. And the reason behind it was painfully obvious. Any parent who tried to raise concerns about their missing child would mysteriously vanish soon after. On an island as small as Tsukekage Island, the pattern should have been suspicious. But the drug dealers had prepared their cover story in advance. The family went on vacation. A convenient lie to explain the disappearances. The townspeople, not wanting to dwell on such unsettling events, chose to accept the deception. "I see." Kaguya clenched her fists, her voice low. "So this is the darkness that exists in the ordinary world." The others also realized the truth. Their eyes returned to the screen, where the bodies of the tortured children remained on full display. A heavy silence descended over the room. They had never encountered this level of human depravity before. This was their first exposure to it and it left a scar deep in their hearts. "How does it feel?" Ren asked softly. "A lesson you'll never forget." Kaguya took a shaky breath. Her face was still pale, but she gave a small nod. "This was necessary," she admitted. The brutality they'd witnessed had etched itself into her memory. Drug dealers weren't simply criminals. They were monsters who had long since abandoned their humanity. "Amamiya, is the supernatural world like this too?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ren gave a faint, bitter smile and shook his head. "In the supernatural world," he began, "with power comes the loss of restraint. Now ask yourself, how many people can still cling to their humanity when given absolute power?" He gestured toward the screen. "These drug dealers are evil, yes. But the supernatural world? It's filled with hidden blades and constant, suffocating malice. There are countless people who will abandon their principles in pursuit of power. Compared to them, these drug dealers are almost tame." The room fell into another long silence. The truth weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders. Kaguya's eyes remained fixed on the screen. She thought back to the moment she had obtained the ice fruit. Her first thought hadn't been about justice or responsibility. It had been about freedom. "Like me," she muttered. "When I got the ice fruit, I couldn't help but think of using that power to break free from the shackles placed on me." Ren gave her an approving nod. "That's exactly it," he said. "Human nature is fragile. When you're trapped, you accept it because you have no other choice. But once power enters your hands, once you realize you have other options, that's when the real test begins. Because under repeated indulgence, human nature shatters." Kaguya closed her eyes and let his words sink in. She had always thought of herself as rational and disciplined. But the mere taste of power had tempted her to abandon that self-control. The line between human and monster was thinner than she'd realized. Chapter 116, The Problem of Human Nature. After the Special Forces completed the clearing operation, the regular officers from the Metropolitan Police Department moved in to investigate the back mountain. Naturally, Inspector Magyar was among them. Even with his years of experience on the force, the scene before him left him speechless. He had seen many gruesome crime scenes throughout his career. But this was different. Seeing the lifeless bodies of middle-aged victims was already tragic enough. But now, several of those corpses belonged to children. The horror of that realization made his stomach churn. Magyar lowered the brim of his hat. "It looks like things on this island are far more complicated than I thought." He had initially assumed that once the drug dealers were subdued, the remaining work would simply involve collecting evidence related to drug production. Confiscating the drugs and dismantling the equipment should have been the straightforward next step. But he'd underestimated the scale of the crime. What lay before him wasn't just about illegal drugs. They were dealing with a massacre, dozens of innocent lives, snuffed out in the name of experimentation. He approached one of the lab tables and examined the sheets of paper pinned to its surface. Chemical formulas and data were scrawled across the pages. The cold, clinical precision of the text contrasted with the brutality of the acts committed here. There were no names listed, only numerical designations. But the patterns clearly referred to test subjects. Human subjects. McGear clenched his teeth so hard his jaw ached. He was a police officer, he'd seen his fair share of human cruelty. But this crossed into something else entirely. Even so, he knew he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. Taking a deep breath, he pulled out his phone and dialed his superior. The line connected after a few seconds. Superintendent Matsumoto, sir. The clearing operation has been completed. Good work, McGear, came Matsumoto Kiyonaga's voice from the other end. McGear hesitated before continuing. Sir. The back mountain was indeed a drug dealer's base. We've confirmed it was being used as a drug manufacturing lab. The brief pause from Matsumoto told McGear that his superior was waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's more, isn't there? Matsumoto asked, his voice low. Yes. McGear steeled himself. In the basement of the drug lab. We discovered a hidden facility. There were dozens of bodies, sir. Men, women. The elderly. Even children. We're certain the drug dealers were using living people to test new drug formulas. What? Matsumoto Kiyonaga's voice shot through the phone like a bullet. Live human experiments? On that scale? The implications made his mind reel. Drug dealers had always treated drug trafficking as a profit-driven enterprise. But now, it seemed they'd crossed a line, moving from distribution into experimentation. The goal? Developing new drugs at the cost of innocent lives. Who the hell gave them the audacity to try something like this? Matsumoto's grip tightened around the receiver. This wasn't something they could quietly sweep under the rug. The Metropolitan Police Department had already mobilized significant resources for the raid. The public would be expecting answers. And, more worryingly, if the data from these experiments had already been shared with other drug syndicates, the consequences could be catastrophic. McGear, secure the scene, Matsumoto ordered, his voice sharp. I need a full, detailed report as soon as possible. Understood, sir. The line went dead. McGear lowered the phone and looked around the lab. The stench of death clung to the air. The corpses hadn't fully decayed yet, but their contorted expressions and visible wounds told the story of their suffering. These victims. He muttered to himself. They were locals. People from Tsukekage Island. He knew what had to be done. Identifying each victim, one by one, was going to be a painstaking process. But it was the only way to bring closure to the families left behind and to build an airtight case against those responsible. He sighed and rubbed his temples. Today was supposed to be his day off. He'd planned to spend a weekend relaxing at home with his wife. But now, he'd be lucky to make it home before next week. Looks like I'll need to apologize to her later, he muttered, forcing himself to focus. After resting for a while, the girls at the Hot Spring Hotel seemed to be in slightly better condition. Unfortunately, none of them had much of an appetite left after what they'd witnessed. Ugh. I feel awful. Chika groaned. After vomiting so many times, even her stomach acid was gone. Her limbs felt weak, and she could only lean against Ren for support. Being close to him was the only thing keeping her fear and nausea at bay. Ren let out a quiet sigh. He gently patted her back, just as he'd done earlier, hoping it would help ease her discomfort. This is why I said some things aren't meant for you to see. Ugh. Yeah. I definitely get that now. Chika finally understood how out of her depth she'd been. It wasn't about gender or age. There are just some scenes that the human mind isn't built to process. Even now, when she closed her eyes, the images of those mangled corpses haunted her. The bodies of those children, especially, were burned into her memory. What kind of torture did those kids go through? She whispered, her voice trembling. Ren gently tapped her forehead with his knuckles. Don't dwell on that, he said softly. Trying to imagine what those kids experienced without any concrete information will only drag you into endless mental exhaustion. If you obsess over it too much, you might end up with lasting psychological damage. Chika rubbed her forehead where he'd tapped her and reluctantly abandoned the thought. Okay. So what should we focus on instead? The question seemed to resonate with everyone else. The others, who had been silently processing the horror they'd seen, turned their attention toward Amamiya Ren. What we should be focusing on, he said, is how to hold on to our humanity. Humanity? Chika repeated, confused. Wait. Are you saying the drug dealers lost their humanity? Exactly, Ren replied, Nodding. He turned to look at Shinomiya Kaguya. Shinomiya-san, remember what I said to you earlier? Kaguya's expression shifted as the memory surfaced. You said that once someone gains power, they'll start pushing past the limits of their humanity without even realizing it. That's right, Ren confirmed. She lowered her gaze. It hadn't even been that long since she'd obtained the ice fruit, and her first instinct had been to think about how it could help her escape the constraints of her family. Humanity isn't just about morals or kindness, Ren continued. It's about empathy. Once someone loses the ability to empathize with others, they stop being human. Without empathy, there's nothing left but instinct, desire, and a hunger for more power. The room grew heavy with silence again. But if they lose their humanity, aren't they still technically human? Ren asked hesitantly. Ren shook his head. No. Someone who discards their humanity in pursuit of power isn't human anymore. They're just monsters that happen to look like people. The word sent chills through everyone present. Monsters. The drug dealers they had seen earlier fit that description perfectly. They had looked like ordinary people, but their actions had proven how little of their humanity remained. Ren's gaze sharpened. This isn't just a philosophical debate, he said. It's directly tied to the path I'm walking. The path of sequence is the path of human nature. Even gods, after all, needed an anchor to hold on to their humanity. Sequence 0 wasn't the end. It was simply the stage where one became powerful enough to bear the responsibility of retaining their humanity, no matter the temptation. Because once someone became consumed by their powers, they stopped being the master of their abilities and became the slave of the power itself. Chapter 117, Self-discipline is not weakness, human nature. It's not something that's easily defined. I'm not some well-read philosopher or a scholar with sophisticated theories. I'm just an ordinary person. My understanding of human nature is shallow, at best. Nothing profound. Amamiya Ren spoke with calm honesty. He wasn't here to impress anyone with complex theories or elegant rhetoric. He was simply sharing his own perspective, one built through experience and observation. To me, human nature is closely tied to desire. People without desires have, in essence, lost their humanity. I honestly don't think there's anyone out there completely devoid of desire. He paused, his eyes reflecting a quiet intensity. Maybe. Not even gods can be free from desire. If gods were truly without desires, they wouldn't need faith. They wouldn't crave power. And without power and faith, would we even still call them gods? So, even gods possess human nature in some form. That's why I believe that emotions and desires are the clearest expressions of human nature. The room grew silent as everyone processed his words. But then, Ren's tone shifted slightly. Of course, I'm not talking about unchecked desires or out-of-control emotions. I'm talking about desires and emotions that remain under our control. Once someone lets their desires run rampant, they stop being human. They become beasts, driven solely by instinct. That's why humans are such complicated creatures. The line between us and beasts isn't just intelligence or speech. It's self-restraint. Self-restraint is the very core of what makes us human. His words carried a weight that resonated deeply. People weren't human simply because of biology. They were human because they could impose limits on themselves, because they could act on reason instead of pure instinct. If a wild animal ever came to understand mortality the way we do, it would start developing something akin to human nature as well. And if that happened, that creature would eventually begin evolving toward humanity. He exhaled slowly. The same principle applies to the path of sequence. Even the gods that reach sequence 0 need anchors to hold on to their humanity. Without that anchor, they fall into madness. Power without restraint is like a ship without a rudder. The stronger someone becomes, the more important it is for them to remember who they are and what they stand for. Ren fell quiet. He wasn't certain how sequence 0 gods managed to maintain their sanity. He only knew one thing: if he ever abandoned his own sense of self, the power would eventually consume him. He refused to live like a beast. After he finished speaking, the weight of his words lingered in the air. Kaguya's gaze was thoughtful. Amamiya, Kaguya finally said, her voice hesitant. If we have to maintain our humanity, then what's the point of pursuing power in the first place? The others shifted uncomfortably. They'd been wondering the same thing. Ren turned toward her and gave a knowing nod. You're wondering why we chase after power if we have to constantly hold ourselves back, right? Kaguya nodded. Exactly. If we can't even use our strength without restraint, doesn't that defeat the purpose? The room held its breath as Ren smiled faintly. And then, he said something that left them completely stunned. Self-discipline doesn't mean you're supposed to feel aggrieved. The girls exchanged confused glances. What do you mean? Kaguya asked. Self-restraint doesn't mean you have to sit back and tolerate being bullied, Amamiya Ren explained. When someone crosses the line, when someone provokes you, you absolutely should respond with the full weight of your strength. But what makes you human is what comes afterward. After punishing the one who provoked you, you don't let yourself get drunk on that feeling of power. When you encounter people like that, the best thing to do is step on their face and make sure they understand that provoking you was the worst decision they ever made. Shinamiya-san, you should know that bottling up your emotions too often can lead to psychological issues. For your own mental well-being, you need to learn how to retaliate. Within reason. So you can feel at ease afterward. Enduring everything without pushing back will only hurt you in the long run. Kaguya froze. She had never heard someone put it this way before. Think about it. Buddhism says that a butcher can become a Buddha the moment they lay down their blade. But Taoism says, if someone wants to become a Buddha, let them. As for me, I have no such intention. In other words, Shinamiya-san, you need to adjust your mindset. If someone bullies you, don't just sit there and take it, bully them back. That's what power is for. Ren's voice was calm, but his words struck a chord with everyone present. Of course, he wasn't advocating for mindless aggression. When you had no power, adopting a Buddhist attitude, one of non-interference was the best approach. But once you possessed the strength to act, it became equally important to follow your heart when dealing with provocations. Power was meant to be used, not hoarded. After all, he added with a slight shrug, it's not like I haven't meddled in other people's affairs before. Besides, who said the pursuit of power was meaningless? Huh? Kaguya blinked, confused. The shift in topic caught her off guard. She was still trying to process his earlier words. What do you mean by that? You asked earlier if there was any point in seeking power when you have to restrain yourself. Well, I'd argue that, especially for girls, power has a very clear, tangible benefit. A benefit for girls? Kaguya tilted her head. The others, sensing something interesting, leaned in closer. Ren smirked. When you reach a certain level of strength, something interesting happens. The stronger you become, the more your body changes to accommodate that strength. With greater mastery over your powers comes an extension of your lifespan. The girls froze. Longevity might sound mythical, but it's not. Eternal life is nearly impossible. But living significantly longer? That's absolutely achievable. Kaguya's eyes widened. Longevity? She repeated. Exactly. Ren nodded. As your power grows, your body and mind adapt. Reaching the point where you could live for centuries isn't unrealistic. And if you're lucky, true immortality might even be within reach. Silence. Longevity. Immortality. Concepts they'd always associated with fairy tales were suddenly being presented as attainable goals. The weight of his words settled over the group. For a moment, no one spoke. And then. Wait. Chika, who had been slouched against Ren in exhaustion, suddenly shot up. Her cheeks, which had been pale from her earlier nausea, flushed a bright, healthy pink. Did you just say immortality? That's right, Ren said with a chuckle. Chika's eyes sparkled. Eternal youth? She squeaked. Ren shrugged again. With enough power? Yes. That's entirely possible. The entire conversation about self-discipline, restraint, and responsibility evaporated in an instant. The girls' expressions shifted from solemn contemplation to burning curiosity. Because now, they'd just discovered the ultimate incentive to seek power. Longevity. Immortality. Eternal youth. Chapter 118. All are paths to demigods. For men, the greatest pursuit is power. For women, the greatest pursuit is immortality, eternal youth. When any form of power reaches its peak, it naturally moves toward immortality. Ren paused for a moment, then glanced at the girls present with a slightly amused expression. Didn't I mention this before? Kaguya fell silent for a moment before giving a slight nod. Yes, you did. At the very first club meeting, Amamiya-san brought up the topic of immortality. You also said that the club would eventually move in that direction. Ren recalled saying something along those lines back then. We just never connected that idea with the concept of immortality. After all, everyone knows that immortality and longevity are fundamentally different. To Kaguya, the notion of true immortality had always seemed distant, so far removed from her reality that she never gave it much thought. Well, now it's time to start working toward it. When any form of power reaches a certain level, it begins to reshape the body itself. As lifespan increases, the natural decay that weakens the body slows down in response to the growth of one's power until, eventually, one attains immortality. Ren stopped here and glanced at the group before continuing, and I think the one most likely to achieve immortality first is Ran. Me? Ran, startled by the sudden mention of her name, pointed to herself in disbelief. Yes. Ren nodded. The body ages due to natural decay, a process rooted in the flesh itself. And the power you've obtained works by transforming the body from the inside out. So, from the moment your body began its transformation, your aging process started to slow down. Of course, true immortality will still take a long time, but your progression will definitely outpace Sanzanin and Shinamiya. Ran's ability, Imperial Sakura Fang, alters her body through the nutrients she consumes, strengthening her power, reaction speed, explosive force, and endurance while slowing the natural decline of her body. Sanzanin, on the other hand, has an anemo vision. That vision is an external magical organ that allows her to absorb external energy and convert it into anemo power. But ultimately, it remains an external power. The vision will undoubtedly grow stronger over time, but the direction of its growth might depend heavily on the contents of the diary. Until then, it's best to focus on training elemental control with as much precision as possible. After all, the god of wind once started with nothing but a single breath of mist. Elemental abilities have immense growth potential. If Sanzanin could overcome the inherent limitations of the vision, she might very well reach the level of a demigod one day. The same goes for Miss Maria. The true form of the rock god is a 1,000-meter-long stone dragon, once revered as a war god. Your vision is of the geo element, power drawn from the earth itself. Ms. Maria, you should work hard to develop your abilities. The geo element embodies stability, structure, and resilience. With it, you can summon stone to crush your enemies, or create an unbreakable shield to protect yourself and others. A solid, unyielding rock always gives people a sense of security. In Ren's eyes, Maria's role as a maid made her an ideal wielder of a George vision. The god of wind. Nagi could still feel the untapped potential of the power she had obtained. There was still a long road ahead. But this was a good start. If she wanted to see her mother again, growing stronger was a necessary condition. Of course, her greatest reliance in achieving that goal remained the diary. But Maria really is a good match for the god of war, huh? Nagi said suddenly. Maria was momentarily speechless. Please don't pair an ordinary girl like me with a title as grand as the god of war, she replied, sounding half exasperated. If anyone here fits that title, it's definitely Miss Hinajaku. Nagi immediately agreed, wholeheartedly. Hinajaku Katsura was undoubtedly a god of war in every sense. Then there's Shinamiya-san, Ren said, his gaze shifting toward her. He left the rest unsaid, but Kaguya immediately understood. I know, she responded softly. The ultimate power of the ice fruit. The ice fruit had already given her considerable strength, and she had no doubts about its potential. Its clarity and power left her with little confusion about the path ahead. However, bringing that power to its peak would require time, patience, and effort. Shinamiya-san, the two weaknesses of the ice fruit that I mentioned before aren't entirely unfounded, Ren explained. But those vulnerabilities might only apply to certain stories. I'm not sure if the ocean in the real world contains the same elements. You might want to test it when the opportunity arises. Yes. Kaguya nodded slightly, already considering the best way to conduct that experiment. By now, the tension that had lingered over the group had mostly dissipated. Ren checked the clock hanging on the wall. Before he knew it, it was already 7:23 in the evening. Past dinner time, he realized. Are you all still hungry? He asked. Hungry? The girls exchanged glances. The answer was obvious, yes. The nausea from earlier had left them drained, and that lingering emptiness in their stomachs had become increasingly difficult to ignore. Honestly, I've been starving for a while now, Kaguya admitted. But I don't think I can eat anything just yet. Ran touched her stomach with a grimace. If I eat now, I'll definitely throw up again, she said with complete confidence. The others silently nodded in agreement. Mr. Amamiya, dinner is actually ready. Maria's voice broke the silence. No meat, though. Just vegetables. At that moment, everyone immediately understood why. After witnessing that grotesque scene earlier, the mere thought of eating meat was unsettling. Ren glanced around the room before slowly standing up. Then I'll go eat first, he said casually. You all should try to eat something, though. It'll be a long night if you go to bed hungry. Chapter 119, Eternal Darkness. In the end, the girls remained hungry but didn't eat. The lingering nausea made it impossible for them to stomach anything. Yesterday's events had also left an impression on Amamiya Ren, though not to the same degree. As long as he avoided meat, he didn't feel the urge to vomit while eating. So, in the end, he was quite satisfied with last night's vegetarian dinner. The next morning, he woke up early as usual. But today, he didn't go for a run. Yesterday's morning jog had only been a pretense to gather intelligence. It wasn't as though Ren had developed a morning exercise habit during his vacation. After waking up, he soaked in the hot spring for a while, washed up, and got dressed. Once he finished his morning routine, he headed to check on the action team stationed near the danger zone of the hotel. Not all the team members were on duty, some remained on guard while others rested. That arrangement was perfectly reasonable. After all, if everyone remained on high alert through the night, they would have been too exhausted to stay sharp by the time morning arrived. Splitting the shifts ensured they maintained their vigilance. After confirming the situation, Ren made his way to the hotel entrance, where Sato Mueko had been stationed. When he arrived, he found the heroic policewoman slumped against the wall, fast asleep in an uncharacteristically unkempt manner. Seeing this, Ren quietly returned to his room, retrieved an extra blanket from the bed, and spread it out on the ground. Then, using the power of the gray fog, he carefully transferred Sato Mueko onto the makeshift bed and covered her with a quilt. With that done, he left without a word. He strolled through the empty main hall and sat down in one of the chairs. The next wave of officers from the Metropolitan Police Department should arrive soon, he thought. The bodies found in the drug lab couldn't be handed over to ordinary officers, they would need professional forensic specialists to handle the situation. The presence of drug dealers actively researching new substances also required experienced narcotics officers to join the investigation. Aside from the frontline special forces, most of the officers here will likely leave with us. Tsukekaji Island wasn't a large place. The only detective stationed here year-round was an old veteran, and the island lacked proper facilities to store bodies, let alone perform autopsies. The bodies would have to be transported to Tokyo. Moving that many corpses is no small task. The interrogation of the captured drug dealers likely wouldn't yield much in just a single night. Besides, Tsukekaji Island was only a small piece of the puzzle, just a stepping stone. The real danger remained in Tokyo. If we want to dismantle the drug network that's spread across Tokyo, we'll have to dig deeper into what these arrested dealers know. As his thoughts drifted along, something suddenly came to mind. The lottery. The contents of yesterday's diary had been unusually eventful. While Ren didn't fully understand the diary's evaluation criteria, he could feel that yesterday's events had been far more intense than usual, perhaps twice as much so. Maybe. This time, I can draw a sequence 8 potion. With that hope in mind, Ren summoned the diary and initiated the lottery. The massive roulette wheel spun rapidly, the needle circling faster and faster. Eventually, it slowed and came to a stop. The pointer landed on a single phrase. Lord of Mysteries. The result wasn't particularly surprising. His path had already been set, it was only a matter of what he might draw along the way. Obtained source, River of Eternal Darkness? Seeing the message, Ren instinctively froze. A giant question mark seemed to appear above his head. But after a moment of disbelief, he quickly processed what had happened. I actually drew a second Sefirah. Did yesterday's diary really have such a big impact? The diary's lottery mechanism prioritized significant emotional impact. The greater the psychological shock on the diary readers, the better the rewards drawn from it. He still remembered how, when he first obtained Sefirah Castle, he self-destructed to lure Shinomiya and the others into investigating him. That exposure combined with the ripple effect on those who read the diary, triggered the most significant change in his life. But for yesterday's events to cause the same effect as that first time. Ren furrowed his brow and recalled the reactions of Kaguya, Nagi, and Ran. Yesterday had ripped open the darkest corner of the ordinary world for them to witness. A corner filled with horror, despair, and filth. And beyond that, it showed them that the supernatural world was no less terrifying. The shock of that revelation had undoubtedly shaken their worldview to its core. Come to think of it, I wasn't immune to that impact either. Even he had never experienced such a grotesque, visceral scene before. Yeah, it really was a lot. The emotional shock, the psychological distress, it had affected everyone involved. And given how fate seemed to influence the diary's mechanisms, maybe it wasn't so surprising that he'd received such a significant reward. And it wasn't just those 3 who were affected. What if the diary also registered the reactions of the other girls? If that were the case, then it might explain how he had drawn another source so quickly. But if the diary acknowledges the emotional impact of others as well, does that mean a second wave of diary holders might soon appear? The possibility intrigued him. If more diary holders emerged, he would prefer to select candidates from the girls who had accompanied him to Tsukekaji Island. After all, they were already somewhat familiar with the mysterious side of the world. Still, let's leave it for later. Ren shook his head, dismissing the thought for now. Instead of continuing to sit in the living room, he returned to his room. There, he used the door pathway's abilities to block the door and seal off any potential intrusions. Once everything was secure, he sat down, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. Focus. A sensation of falling immediately followed. Plop. It felt like his entire body had been submerged in water. Ren opened his eyes, but the world around him was pitch black, an abyss of shadow without any discernible color. He realized he was floating within a river, though he felt no discomfort. I can still breathe normally. As he slowly adjusted to the darkness, faint glimmers of light became visible. An inexplicable glow filtered down from above, causing the surrounding water to shimmer softly. The river surged beneath him, pushing his body upward. The invisible current lifted him until he broke through the surface. There, beyond the river, he saw a familiar sight. A majestic castle stood on the river bank, its walls adorned with a faint, star-like radiance. The castle gates were wide open, as though waiting for him to step inside. Sefirah Castle. The river flowing before Sefirah Castle is actually the river of eternal darkness? The realization struck him like a thunderclap. Had his own actions caused this shift? At that moment, he could feel an unfamiliar resonance, a new connection between the Sefirahs. If the Evernight goddess from the other world saw this scene, she would probably lose her mind. Chapter 120, a very useful transformation ability, writing a diary out of curiosity, and I ended up with Sefirah Castle and the River of Eternal Darkness. If Amon and the Evernight goddess from that world knew about this, they'd probably explode with rage. It was hard to imagine the time and effort Amon had spent scheming to seize Sefirah Castle. And the Evernight goddess. Her efforts in establishing the River of Eternal Darkness were no less significant. The celestial worthy had sealed a vast number of Sefirah fragments within the western continent. Unlocking those seals to allow the corresponding sequence 0 true gods the chance to advance to the level of the old ones required either the resurrection of the celestial worthy or the birth of a new Lord of Mysteries. A task that demanded meticulous preparation, long-term planning, and extraordinary patience. After all, giving rise to a brand new Lord of Mysteries wasn't something that could happen overnight. And yet, all I did was write a diary. With nothing more than that, Ren had obtained not only Sefirah Castle but now also the River of Eternal Darkness. It was almost laughable. A cosmic irony. But it also raised another intriguing point. So, the diary can harvest other types of essences. But I won't deviate from my core paths. Mastering 3 adjacent pathways was already an extraordinary feat. Even if the diary provided access to other pathways, he had no intention of jumping tracks. Placing both hands on the riverbank, Ren pushed himself out of the water. His clothes were soaked with the dark, colorless water of the River of Eternal Darkness, yet the sensation of dampness never came. The water sank effortlessly into his skin. A strange calmness washed over him. The surging spiritual energy within his body quieted, leaving him with a profound sense of tranquility. The world itself seemed to dim, its noise reduced to a faint whisper. Even his own presence felt like it was dissolving into the surrounding stillness. Eyes closed, Ren took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes, he raised his hand. A droplet of colorless water condensed in his palm. Secret. The droplet vanished. Sword. In an instant, an ancient-looking sword materialized in his grasp. The blade was simple, with no ornate engravings or unnecessary embellishments. It was perfectly balanced, neither too long nor too broad. It reminded him of the swords often seen in historical dramas. But unlike the iron and steel blades from those shows, this sword looked more like it was forged from bronze. Its surface shimmered faintly, carrying an inexplicable sense of weight and mystery. Ren recognized it immediately. The Sword of Dawn. This sword wasn't just a random manifestation, it was the personalized form of the Sword of Dawn. I never really liked great swords to begin with. Even in games, he always preferred bows and ranged combat over cumbersome melee weapons. His skill with great swords was so abysmal that he only ever used them while watching others play. Perhaps this subconscious preference had shaped the sword's form, molding it into something more familiar and comfortable in his hands. He tested the grip for a moment, then muttered to himself, "Not bad. Though I don't really use swords much." He paused. "What about a card deck?" The Sword of Dawn shimmered in response. Its form shifted like liquid metal, flowing between his fingers until it solidified into a deck of cards. A complete tarot deck. The cards felt smooth and cool against his skin, their backs adorned with subtle, shimmering patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. I didn't expect it to be this versatile. He fanned out the cards and inspected them. They were practically indistinguishable from regular tarot cards, except for the faint, otherworldly aura they emitted. It looks like I won't need to replace my tarot decks anymore. Divination tools conjured from the River of Eternal Darkness were far superior to any ordinary cards. Their origin granted them a connection to something far deeper and more profound than mundane fortune-telling. The River of Eternal Darkness itself was inexhaustible. Its waters naturally replenished, making it an endless source of energy. Ren shuffled the cards absent-mindedly. Suddenly, they dissolved into water droplets and vanished. Huh. It's like it's reminding me that the cards can revert to river water anytime. So there really is no consumption issue. This meant he could use tarot cards freely during divinations without worrying about running out of materials. That's going to come in handy. He let out a soft exhale. The river of eternal darkness didn't reject him, it welcomed him, much like Sefirah Castle had. Its power was already beginning to resonate with his body, adapting itself to his presence. Ren had now gained initial control over the river of eternal darkness. However, the integration process was slow, noticeably slower than it had been with Sefirah Castle. The reason wasn't difficult to guess. I didn't choose the pathway associated with the river of eternal darkness, he thought. That's probably why the integration is taking longer. But he wasn't particularly concerned. Obtaining the river of eternal darkness had been an unexpected windfall, and he wasn't about to complain about the slower synchronization. It's fine if it takes a while. Integrating with a source essence is a naturally slow process anyway. The fact that it's already showing some progress is good enough. Satisfied with that conclusion, Ren closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was back in his room. The effect of the river of eternal darkness was already noticeable. His emotions felt more stable, his spirit calmer, and the subtle agitation that usually accompanied heightened spiritual activity had dissipated. This feels like the ability of a Sequence 6 Soul Assurer. The comparison made sense. The power resembled that of the Darkness Pathway's Soul Assurer, a role focused on calming restless souls and navigating the mysteries of death. And if that's the case, then the Sword of Dawn must come from the extraordinary characteristics of the Twilight Giant Pathway's Sequence 6. Dawn Paladin. He frowned slightly. Why does the River of Eternal Darkness seem to offer more immediate utility than Sefirah Castle did? When I first obtained Sefirah Castle, it could only grant abilities from Sequence 7. But the River of Eternal Darkness is already giving me access to Sequence 6 level powers. Curious, Ren experimented further with the newly acquired abilities. After several attempts, he began to understand the underlying mechanics. So that's how it works. The River of Eternal Darkness can manifest individual abilities at higher sequence levels, but it can't grant the complete set of powers from that sequence unless I reach the corresponding level of authority. The logic aligned with what he already knew about the source essences. The power from the river wasn't an all-access pass to higher-tier abilities, it simply allowed him to access fragments of extraordinary skills from select pathways. That discovery immediately elevated the river's strategic value. Sequence 6 level abilities from the Dawn Paladin and Soul Assurer paths are already highly practical. Even if the integration process was slow and the river couldn't yet grant more advanced powers, these partial abilities still held immense potential. And the Death Pathway's Sequence 6 abilities. The thought made him pause. In a world where death was a never-present reality, abilities from the Death Pathway would undoubtedly become invaluable. Especially when dealing with mysteries and incidents like the one we just experienced on Tsukekage Island. Satisfied with his assessment, Ren shifted his focus back to the present. Time to check in with the others. He stood up, brushed himself off, and left the room. Let's see just how lucky they've been this time. Chapter 121, Relieved Hea. Maria woke up later than usual that morning, something quite rare for her. Her mind felt foggy, her body sluggish. The horrific scenes from the night before still haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cruel, inhumane experiments the drug dealers had conducted. The images lingered, vivid and inescapable. She hadn't managed to fall asleep until she was completely exhausted, and even then, her sleep had been restless and fragmented. Maria turned her head slightly and glanced at the futon beside her. Nagi lay there, still asleep. Although her brows were knitted with unease, the presence of Izumi beside her seemed to provide some measure of comfort. Mr. Amamiya was right. Yesterday was too overwhelming for everyone. Grrr. A low, involuntary growl came from her stomach. Maria placed a hand on her abdomen, her cheeks coloring slightly. She had vomited everything she'd eaten the previous afternoon. And when dinner came around, the nausea had been so intense that she hadn't managed a single bite. Now, with the morning light streaming through the windows, hunger gnawed at her insides. Carefully, she got up from beneath the covers and slipped into a windproof yukata. She adjusted the hem, tiptoed toward the door, and quietly left the room. The hallway felt cold against her skin as she made her way toward the kitchen. As she passed through the main hall, she stopped in surprise. Mr. Amamiya. There he was, sitting at the dining table, eating breakfast. And in front of him, spread across the table, were the untouched dishes from the previous night. Before she could greet him, her stomach betrayed her once more. Grrr. The sound echoed faintly through the room. Ren turned toward her, just in time to see Maria's face flush with embarrassment as she covered her stomach with both hands. You didn't eat dinner, and you threw up everything from earlier, he said matter-of-factly. It's perfectly normal to feel this hungry. He gestured to the food. Come on, sit down and eat. It's all leftovers from yesterday, but it's better than nothing right now. Maria hesitated. The dizziness and faint blurriness in her vision told her that her blood sugar was dangerously low. She could feel the weakness in her limbs, the slight tremor in her hands. He's right. There was no time for pride or pretense. Nodding, she shuffled toward the table, nearly tripping over herself in her hurry. She slid into the chair across from Ren. A steaming bowl of rice appeared in front of her. "Thank you," she mumbled, barely registering the words before digging in. Hunger erased all thought of table manners. Maria shoveled rice into her mouth and then reached for the vegetables, picking up crisp lettuce, tender bamboo shoots, and leafy greens with her chopsticks and combining them with mouthfuls of fragrant rice. The flavors were simple, but in her current state, every bite tasted like heaven. An old grandmother would probably say this is what it means to appreciate your blessings. Ren watched her eat without comment. Given that Maria had gone nearly a full day without food, her appetite was understandable. In minutes, the rice bowl was empty. The pallor that had drained her face earlier was gone, replaced by a faint rosy hue. Burp. The unexpected sound caught Maria off guard. Her eyes went wide, and she clamped a hand over her mouth. Before the blush could fully rise to her cheeks, a cup of warm water appeared in front of her. Maria accepted it with both hands and drank deeply. The warmth eased the tightness in her chest, suppressing the urge to burp again. "Thank you," she said softly, setting the empty cup down. "No problem." An awkward silence followed. It took Maria a few moments to regain her composure. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "Mr. Amamiya, you're up early today." "I woke up to check the situation around the hotel," he replied, leaning back slightly. "And I was hungry, so I figured I'd have breakfast." His tone was light, as though he were discussing the weather. Maria smiled faintly. "And Sansanin? Still asleep?" "Yeah. Yesterday was a lot for her to handle." Maria sighed. "I suppose it was inevitable. Nagi had been through a kidnapping because of her family's inheritance. Though her sheltered life had spared her from much of the world's darkness, the trauma of that experience still lingered." "This experience might have been terrifying," Ren said, "but it's not necessarily a bad thing." Maria immediately understood what he meant. The world wasn't as safe as Nagi sometimes imagined. Being exposed to its harsh realities might serve as a wake-up call. The people who went after her inheritance won't always play nice. The world is full of desperate people. And Nagi needed to understand that reality. She needed to grasp the dangers that lurked beyond her sheltered world and develop a sense of caution to protect herself. "That child's been forcing herself from the very beginning," Maria said softly. "I've noticed," Ren replied. He was well aware of Nagi's personality. Sundeer. Stubborn. Strong-willed. Even when terrified, she pushed herself to stay composed. She might be scared out of her mind, but she'd never let it show easily. She forced herself to get the method to revive her mother from the diary. He paused. "What do you think, Ms. Maria?" Maria fell silent for a moment, then chuckled lightly. "With the right motivation, she'll figure it out." She sighed and shook her head. "I've probably coddled her too much all these years. She's grown completely dependent on me. That, and her identity constantly makes her a target for kidnappers." She ran a hand through her hair. "That's why she hates going outside." Ren didn't respond right away. Avoiding the world out of fear. It was understandable. Anyone who had been kidnapped multiple times as a child would naturally feel apprehensive about stepping beyond their comfort zone. But prolonged isolation was dangerous in its own right. If Nagi stays like that for too long, she'll become an internet shut-in. Maria had shared the same concern in the past. But now, seeing Nagi's involvement with the diary and her new determination to bring her mother back, she wondered if it might actually be a blessing in disguise. The mysteries might be frightening, but they've given her a purpose. Now Nagi had a reason to push herself beyond her comfortable bubble. The only person who could save Shiko Sanzanin was Nagi herself. No one else could do it for her. Maria took a deep breath and bowed slightly toward Ren. "Mr. Amamiya, I need to thank you for the changes you've brought to Nagi." Ren shook his head. "This is her own doing," he said firmly. "I only told her that her mother wasn't truly gone, but that saving her would depend entirely on her own efforts." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "The diary reacts to people's desires. It offers a path toward their goals, but it doesn't grant miracles. If Nagi truly wants to bring her mother back, she has to work for it." Maria's eyes softened. "He's right." Ren looked at her. "And you're part of that goal, too." Maria blinked in surprise. "Me?" He gave a faint nod. "Nagi doesn't want to lose you. She's pushing herself to grow so that she can stay by your side." Maria's lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. Then she smiled. A genuine, relieved smile. "For the longest time, I thought she could only grow if I left her." She let out a soft laugh. "But maybe. If she knows what lies ahead, she'll grow without me needing to disappear." Her gaze shifted toward the room where Nagi was still sleeping. "And if that's the case?" Maria smiled again, this time with quiet determination. Then I guess I won't be going anywhere. She had said the words casually, almost offhandedly. But the warmth in her voice made it clear, she never truly wanted to leave Nagi in the first place. Chapter 122. A police officer must be practical. After completing their operation, the special forces set up a perimeter around Tsukekage Island, ensuring that no one could escape in the ensuing chaos. Meanwhile, the investigation inside the island was handled by detectives dispatched from the Metropolitan Police Department. Even the cleanup phase was proving to be anything but easy. A thorough search of the island's interior was required. Were there still drug dealers hiding among the civilians? Who were the dozens of unidentified corpses beneath the drug lab? The detectives worked tirelessly through the night. Inspector Megurjuzo let out a deep yawn, barely keeping his eyes open. He was exhausted. Interrogations, investigations, endless paperwork, he had been working through the night without rest. I'm getting too old for this. Back in the day, he could handle cases like this without breaking a sweat. But now, he couldn't keep up with the younger officers the way he used to. At that moment, Chiba Kazanobu approached him with a report. Inspector Megure, we've completed the preliminary interrogations and investigations. The captured drug dealers have admitted to their involvement in drug trafficking. Most of them have already confessed. Megure gave a slow nod. And the corpses? We've confirmed their identities, Chiba replied, his tone slightly heavy. All of them were civilians from Tsukekage Island. Megure's brows furrowed. Were they just random targets? Chiba shook his head. Not exactly. They were people who kept to themselves, villagers who rarely interacted with others. Because of that, their disappearances didn't attract much attention. Megure exhaled sharply. As expected. The drug dealers had deliberately chosen victims who were unlikely to be missed. People who lived quietly, without close connections to their neighbors. Inhuman bastards. Even now, after all his years in law enforcement, Megure still found himself disgusted by the depths of human cruelty. And the identities of the dead drug dealers? He asked. Chiba hesitated. That isn't fully confirmed yet. Identifying the deceased criminals was far more difficult, especially for those without proper records. Megure wasn't surprised. If it's not done yet, keep working on it, he said, his voice steady. We need to confirm who they were. And more importantly, we need to find out if there are any other accomplices still out there. Chiba nodded. Understood. This is going to be a long process, Megure continued. Some things won't be solved overnight. For now, compile the confirmed identities. As for the rest, we'll pass them on to the Narcotics Division. They have more experience with drug-related crimes. Let them handle the deeper investigation. Yes, sir. Chiba felt a wave of relief at those words. In all his years as a detective, he had never encountered a case this severe. Just as he was about to leave, a thought occurred to him. Inspector Megure, what about Takagi? Should we keep him on guard duty? Megure barely hesitated. Let him stay. Chiba was momentarily taken aback. Megure sighed. You know what level Takagi is at. In terms of investigative skill, he's not that different from Mori Kogoro in his early days. Chiba nearly choked at the comparison. But between the two, Mori was the better detective. Megure rubbed his temples. Mori may have made reckless deductions at times, but he was still one of the most capable officers the department had back then. He wasn't a master detective, but when it came to handling cases, he got the job done. He let out another sigh, exhaustion creeping into his voice. The same can't exactly be said for Takagi. Aside from his lack of strong deduction skills, Mori excelled in other areas. His ability to act, his physical capabilities, and his focus during investigations were all top-notch. Moreover, he was an exceptional marksman. His shooting skills were second to none in the department. Compared to him, Takagi Wataru was severely lacking. During investigations, Takagi often struggled, his inability to control his words, his poor execution, and his lack of focus on cases frequently led to problems. In the past, Megure had believed that real-world experience would help Takagi improve over time. But after observing his performance in recent cases, Megure was no longer optimistic. At this rate, it's better to just have him stand guard during major cases rather than risk him messing up a good investigation. This case is huge, and the higher-ups are watching closely, Megure said grimly. We can't afford to let Takagi ruin things again. If he can't even handle standing guard properly, I won't be able to protect him this time. For minor mistakes in routine cases, Megure could shield his subordinates. But for an operation of this scale, involving drug cartels and multiple deaths, even he had limits. That was why Megure preferred to assign Takagi to guard duty rather than entrust him with any critical tasks. Also, Megure continued, glancing at Chiba Kazanobu, once we return, you'll be responsible for guiding him. If Takagi still can't adapt to the work of Investigation Division 1, I'll report to Superintendent Matsumoto and have him reassigned back to traffic duty. Chiba clicked his tongue slightly. He knew that if Takagi failed this time, it would be his last chance. Once an officer was sent back to the traffic department, their career path was essentially sealed. Most police officers started out as traffic cops before earning the chance to transfer to other divisions. But if someone who had transferred out proved incapable of handling the work, they wouldn't get another opportunity. Being sent back meant they would likely spend the rest of their career in traffic enforcement with little to no chance of further advancement. For Takagi, this was a make-or-break moment. Yes, I'll talk to him later, Chiba said seriously. Mugure nodded and gave Chiba a firm pat on the shoulder. Make sure he understands. Tell him to adapt to Division 1's work as soon as possible. I don't want to send a young officer with ambition back to a dead-end role. Also, tell him to stop trying to impress Officer Sato. Mugure sighed, shaking his head. Being a police officer means staying grounded. He can't afford to get distracted by unnecessary things. If he can't even do his job properly, what right does he have to think about anything else? If he really wants to catch Officer Sato's attention, he should start by proving himself as a competent officer. Mugure frowned. But at the rate he's going now, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Chapter 123, Do you know about the back mountain? Inspector Mugure, you knew? Chiba looked at Mugure in surprise. Isn't that obvious? Mugure narrowed his eyes, feeling a little insulted. He wasn't blind, nor was he oblivious to the atmosphere around him. He knew perfectly well how many men in the Metropolitan Police Department were interested in Sato Mueko. There are plenty of single officers in the department. Of course, I know how many have their eyes on Officer Sato. But at the end of the day, her personal life is her business. If those guys want to pursue her, that's their choice, as long as they do their jobs properly. Mugure had never opposed workplace relationships within the department. In fact, the Metropolitan Police Department encouraged officers to date within the force, believing it helped with work-life balance. So he was well aware of Sato's admirers and frankly, he didn't mind. But in the end, Sato Mueko would make her own decisions. As long as everyone was doing their jobs, he had no reason to interfere. That said, Takagi? Could he even say he was doing his job properly? Clearly not. So Mugure didn't feel the need to say anything else. If Takagi couldn't even handle his own duties as an officer, then there was nothing to discuss. He needed to focus on proving himself first. And if he couldn't, then he'd be heading back to Traffic Division. Chiba, remind that idiot Takagi for me. Yes, I understand. As he turned to leave, Chiba wiped the sweat from his forehead. Takagi. You better take this seriously this time. As much as he got along with Takagi, work was work. If Takagi couldn't adapt to Division 1, then he would have to go back to traffic. 2 hours later, as the sun slowly rose, the women at the hot spring inn began to wake up one by one. Ugh! Sato Mueko, who had been sleeping near the entrance, was the first to stir. She sat up groggily, rubbing her eyes. It took a moment for her mind to catch up with her surroundings. Bedding? Her head was still hazy from sleep. But then, a certain figure popped into her mind. Was it him? In this entire hot spring inn, aside from the security team, there was only one other person who could have carried her. Amamiya Ren. She exercised regularly and was fully aware of her own weight. She was heavier than most women her age due to her muscle mass. Yet, he had carried her so effortlessly. Sure enough, my instincts were right. He gives off an older presence. Almost like a father figure. Sato pursed her lips. Somehow, that makes it feel like he took advantage of me. But at the same time, being taken care of like that wasn't a bad feeling. Shaking her head, she pushed those thoughts aside and sat up fully. There was no time for distractions. She needed to contact Inspector Mugure and report in. Pulling out her phone, she quickly dialed his number. Good morning, Inspector Mugure. There were no issues at the hot spring inn last night. No attempted raids from the drug dealers. Mugure, who had been up all night, finally allowed himself to relax a little. Good. At least the young ladies are safe. With the drug cartel under control and no casualties on their side, this Tsukekaji Island operation had been a success. Now, they just needed to process the remaining criminals. Good work, Officer Sato. Yes, sir. Mueko smiled slightly. Inspector, have all the drug dealers been captured? The ringleaders from the community center have been arrested. Most of them have already confessed and provided details on their members. Right now, we're conducting blood tests on civilians to identify any remaining operatives. Mueko nodded. So the community center is secured. And what about the back mountain? A brief silence followed. Then, Mugure's voice came through, steady and deliberate. The back mountain. All the drug dealers there were eliminated. Our team is handling the cleanup. Mueko paused, immediately understanding what he meant. Magyar was deliberately withholding details. He wasn't doing it to deceive her, he just didn't want her to know. And if that was the case, then it's something I shouldn't ask about. She decided not to push further. Officer Sato, your assignment isn't over yet. You're still on guard duty until the operation is fully wrapped up. I'll have to trouble you to continue overseeing things on your end. Yes, sir. As she ended the call, Mieko exhaled and lay back down for a moment. Inspector Magyar worked through the entire night. And the back mountain. If he was keeping it from her, that meant whatever had happened there was serious. Something I'm better off not knowing. Some things weren't meant to be dwelled on. If she really wanted answers, she'd have to ask Magyar directly when the time was right. You're awake? A familiar voice and the sound of approaching footsteps made her sit up. Looking toward the source, Mieko's lips curled slightly. Amamiya ran. She leaned on her hands and adjusted her position. Thanks for last night. Not last night, he corrected. It was already morning. He sat down next to her. We're heading back today. Tomorrow's Monday. Back to classes. He glanced at her. Not exactly the weekend vacation you were expecting. Mieko smirked. No kidding. Running into a bunch of drug dealers kind of ruins the whole relaxation part of a hot spring trip. Ren simply nodded. This weekend had been anything but relaxing. Drug dealers, supernatural entities, and constant danger. But it hadn't been a waste. In fact, Ren had gained quite a few benefits from this trip to Tsukekage Island. He glanced at Sato Mieko. The Metropolitan Police Department won't have it easy for a while. The drug cartel was using Tsukekage Island as a gateway to Tokyo. Now that their operation has been exposed, law enforcement will likely start rooting out drug networks around the city one by one. And that kind of work won't be resolved overnight. It's going to be a long-term effort. Right. Mieko shared the same thoughts. She looked at the boy in front of her, recalling how Inspector Magyar had deliberately concealed information earlier. She hesitated for a moment but couldn't suppress her curiosity. Do you know what really happened in the back mountain? Chapter 124, Magic Nullification. No. Ren shook his head slightly. But I do know that dozens of corpses were carried down from the back mountains. Corpses aren't anything unusual, though. Mieko didn't think dead bodies were anything special. Officer Sato, you're talking about ordinary drug dealer corpses that were shot. But I'm talking about corpses that were strapped to experiment tables. Mieko froze for a moment, then understood. Those corpses were likely the key thing Inspector Magyar had been hiding from her. Corpses fixed to experiment tables. She began considering the implications. Drug dealers weren't researchers. Their goal must have been to develop drugs that were more addictive but harder to detect. So, they used living people for experiments? Mieko's breathing quickened. But she quickly regained control of her emotions. Now she understood why Inspector Magyar didn't want her to know. Some things just weren't meant for her to see. Especially since that teetered on the very edge of humanity's moral limits. Taking a deep breath, Mieko decided not to get involved. She knew that specialized tasks should be left to the professionals. She wasn't a narcotics officer, nor could she transfer to the narcotics unit to investigate. So, she could only suppress those thoughts. I understand. Mieko paused, then added more seriously, don't tell anyone else about what happened earlier. No one likes listening to horror stories. Ren had no intention of telling anyone about it. That's good, then. Mieko let out a sigh of relief. She stopped thinking about the corpses. That was Inspector Magyar's problem now. Once the news about the drug dealers broke and the case became public, she would gradually learn more about the corpses anyway. Alright, you should get some rest. Our ship leaves at 1 p.m. If you don't rest now, you won't have any energy this afternoon. Mieko checked the time. It was 8:32 a.m. She had only slept for 3 hours, and suddenly, her eyelids felt unbearably heavy. Sorry, I can't stay awake anymore. Drowsiness hit her like a wave. Her body felt unbelievably light, her mood was calm, and her eyelids were so heavy that she could barely keep them open. Mieko collapsed onto the bedding, her heavy eyelids making it nearly impossible to open her eyes. After muttering an apology, she immediately fell into deep sleep. Ren glanced at the completely asleep Mieko and nodded slightly. The Soul Assurer's abilities are really useful. There was no need to worry about Officer Sato. He was certain she would sleep soundly until noon. As for the other action units stationed here, they were in terrible shape. Staying up all night had severely impacted their condition, and even those who had taken shifts to rest were not in good shape. After making sure the only person likely to cause problems was dealt with, Ren returned to the main hall. A group of girls were sitting in the main hall, dark circles under their eyes, and every now and then, a stomach growled. Growl. As Ren approached, he heard a particularly loud stomach growl. With a flushed face, Ren lowered her head, clutching her empty stomach in embarrassment. The other girls looked over, but no one laughed. Because they were all in the same situation. They had already thrown up everything they needed to yesterday. On top of that, they hadn't eaten dinner, so it was inevitable. Just hang in there a little longer. Ms. Maria is already preparing some temporary vegetarian dumplings in the kitchen. No meat, they're made with pure vegetables. The girls in the room collectively breathed a sigh of relief. As long as it wasn't meat, they were fine. None of them wanted to touch anything meat-related for a while. After all, the images Ren had recorded yesterday were horrifyingly clear, capturing the final moments of each corpse in vivid detail. Because of the varying dosages of drugs and the differing times of death, the level of decomposition varied between corpses. The impact of those images lingered. At least for now, those who had seen them couldn't stomach the thought of eating meat. While we wait, let's talk. I recorded some notes about what happened yesterday in my diary and did a quick draw this morning. The results were beyond what I expected. What was originally supposed to be a sequence 8 potion had turned into something beyond sequence. Even now, Ren still found it hard to believe. Ren, Sanzanin, Shinamiya, you can all try drawing a card. Maybe it'll be a surprise. The three looked at each other, and Ren was the first to raise her hand. Then, I'll go first. Nagi and Kaguya both nodded slightly. Ren summoned her diary and started the lottery process. The large spinning wheel turned. The pointer stopped in a different section than last time. Nejima. Magister Negi Magi, obtained special ability, magic nullification, A. Since the indicator had stopped at a different section than before, Ren was stunned. Ren, what's magic nullification? Magic nullification? Ren was momentarily taken aback, then immediately realized. Magic nullification? That's Kagurazaka Asuna's ability, the power to reduce all magic to zero. I didn't expect you to get her special ability. No wonder, the first title you received enhanced your physical functions. It seemed, just like in his own case, that Ran's previous title had actually been a clue. Everything had been arranged from the start. Ran, this is an ability that nullifies supernatural forces like magic and mana. But I think it's more than just that. As he spoke, a deck of tarot cards appeared in Ren's hand. Ran, don't move. Okay. Ren flicked a tarot card toward Ran. Buzz buzz. As the card approached, an invisible force field suddenly resisted the attack. But it wasn't a complete nullification, it only slowed down the flying tarot card. There were even electric-like sparks in the air. Kai. Although the power surrounding Ran resisted the attack for a moment, in the end, the tarot card still pierced through. It lodged itself straight into the wall behind her. Chapter 125, Once Star Dragon Ball. The ability to nullify magic can indeed affect forces beyond just magic and magical power. However, there is an upper limit to how much it can nullify forces other than magic and magical power. Or rather, the ability to nullify magic is greatly diminished when facing higher-level forces. Based on the situation just now, Ren could roughly determine the upper limit of magic nullification. Demigod. It could completely nullify abilities below the demigod level. But against forces above the demigod level, its effectiveness would be greatly reduced. Even the power of a demigod couldn't be completely negated. It's almost exactly as I speculated. Right now, the highest level of power that the diary grants its holders seems to be demigod. It's still uncertain whether there are powers beyond the demigod level. Perhaps they would only find out when they truly reach that limit. Ren opened his hand, and the tarot cards embedded in the wall flew back into his palm. Shinamiya's ice fruit can only match Ran's current abilities when fully developed. Sanzanin and Ms. Maria's elemental powers are almost completely ineffective against Ran. Even Sajanamiya's spiritual power is the same. If Ran can further develop her magic nullification, or even control it at will, then even Shinamiya's fully utilized abilities could be nullified. Magic nullification was just that powerful. This ability was practically a nightmare for magicians. Once fully unleashed, the entire magic world would crumble into nothing under the influence of an anti-magic field. It's the perfect ability for Ran. Because she had no supernatural powers, only raw, physical strength. Enhancing her physical abilities to the extreme, then pairing it with magic nullification, was a devastating combination against anyone who relied on anything beyond their physical body. This is beyond imagination. Kaguya could already tell how Ran's ability countered hers. Not only Kaguya, but even Nagi understood just how terrifying magic nullification was. It's more than just beyond imagination. Nagi added. If even our powers can be nullified, what about the power of evil spirits? That won't work. Ren immediately gave a clear and precise answer. Evil spirits are born from emotions and obsessions. Magic nullification can't affect emotions or obsessions. So, Ran's ability won't directly dispel evil spirits. However, since evil spirits' attacks contain negative energy, those attacks will be ineffective against Ran. Of course, I'm only talking about ordinary evil spirits. The two nodded slightly. His explanation made perfect sense. At the same time, they also understood how to counter magic nullification. In simple terms, it nullifies energy-based attacks. However, the effects caused by energy itself cannot be nullified. Conceptual things, like emotions and obsessions, won't be affected either. I don't think natural disasters like avalanches or tsunamis would be nullified either. Nagi briefly summarized her deductions. Ren nodded slightly. That's right. This is why I say this ability is perfect for Ran. Most energy-based attacks will be ineffective against her, and on top of that, her own attacks can nullify the abilities of others. Once Ran gets close, you better hope she hasn't reached the speed of a bullet yet. Otherwise, you're just getting beaten up. Magic nullification was the ultimate close combat ability. Once a magic nullification user engaged in melee combat, unless their opponent's power far exceeded theirs, the only choices left were to run or get beaten up. Yeah, Ran's ability this time is pretty clear-cut. As for developing it further, Ran, you should try experimenting in the future. Ran nodded slightly. She didn't fully understand how to control this power yet, but figuring that out would have to wait. Alright, Shinamiya and Sanzanin. Who's next? I'll go. Nagi stepped forward without hesitation. Taking a deep breath, she took out her diary. Her hand hovered over the roulette wheel, her heart racing. She had no idea if this draw would give her what she truly wanted. The pointer spun and slowly stopped. Dragon Ball, obtained, 1-star Dragon Ball, one-time use. Suddenly, a yellow-orange sphere fell into Nagi's hand. Inside the translucent sphere, a red pentagram was clearly visible. Seeing the Dragon Ball, even Ren was momentarily stunned. Dragon Balls were far more reliable than Fate's wishing machines, Holy Grail, and much less risky. Mr. Amamiya, do you know what this ball Nagi got is? Maria was the first to notice Ran's subtle reaction. Yeah, I do. This time, Sanzanin obtained exactly what she wanted most. Resurrection. Nagi's breathing hitched for a moment. Ren's words sent a shockwave through everyone present. The diary had already given them mysterious powers and revealed the supernatural world to them. But resurrection was something on an entirely different level. One is not enough, you need to collect 7 Dragon Balls to summon the dragon and make your wish. Even though gathering all 7 was a restriction, it still meant hope for Nagi. 7 Dragon Balls. Once she collected them all, she could summon the dragon and make a wish. This was so much better than having no hope at all. It's great. Nagi's shoulders trembled slightly, and she clutched the Dragon Ball tightly. As long as she could gather all 7, her mother could come back. She could finally see hope. Now, she just had to move forward and make it happen. Sanzanin, your vision can store objects. You shouldn't keep the Dragon Ball out in the open. Ren's reminder snapped Nagi out of her daze. She quickly retrieved her vision, examined it briefly, then with a single thought, stored the Dragon Ball inside. Chapter 126, Dorador Fruit. The impact of the Dragon Ball was undeniable. Collecting 7 Dragon Balls could grant a wish, even resurrecting someone. But precisely because of this, all the girls present gained a new understanding of the diary's limits. It had the power to grant abilities for no reason, even something as taboo as resurrection. This diary was beyond anything they had imagined. Dragon Balls are one of the few special items capable of resurrection. Aside from bringing someone back to life, they can also grant wishes like regaining youth, immortality, and more. However, excessive wishes often disrupt the natural order, which can lead to serious consequences. Ren explained the mechanics behind the Dragon Balls. Then, a wish or two won't be a problem. Ren waved his hand dismissively. Besides, the Dragon Ball you obtained is probably a consumable item, right? Nagi immediately recalled the description she had seen. Right. It does say one-time use. Exactly. The Dragon Ball appeared because your wish aligned with the diary's power. But obtaining Dragon Balls is extremely difficult. You need to collect 7 just to make a single wish, and each Dragon Ball can only be used once. That restriction is what balances the power of the wish. The Dragon Ball's existence, along with its many limitations, made it clear that it wasn't some overpowered, all-purpose wishing machine. Ren even suspected that the Dragon Ball Nagi received was specifically tailored for her mother's resurrection, nothing else. Otherwise, the ability to make any wish come true would be too much. There's no way something that powerful would exist without conditions. Wishes needed to be regulated. Especially resurrection, one of the greatest taboos. Yet, Nagi wasn't disappointed. Once is enough. Other desires I can strive for through my own efforts. But resurrection, that is something no amount of effort can achieve. Her resolve was unwavering. Bringing her mother back was her greatest wish. Ren understood. There were things you could work for, But some wishes. Some things could never be achieved, no matter how hard you tried. Then, he shifted his gaze to Kaguya. Ran had obtained magic nullification. Nagi had received the 1-star Dragon Ball. Now, it was Kaguya's turn. Shinomiya-san, it's your turn next. Kaguya took a deep breath. Her gaze locked onto Ren, hesitation flickering in her eyes. The diary grants abilities based on the owner's strongest desire. Ren, what do you think I need most? That question was broad. Ren didn't answer immediately. He took his time, carefully considering her situation. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. What you need most is someone you can trust. The moment she heard those words, a glimmer of light flashed in Kaguya's eyes. In the story I know, that is the one thing Shinomiya-san needs more than anything. Even when you were betrayed, there was still one person you could never let go of. As Ren spoke, his eyes shifted to the girl standing behind Kaguya. I think the person you need most is Hayasaka-san. She's the one you trust the most. Your oldest friend. Even when she betrayed you, you let it go. Now that you've broken free from your cage, you still spared her. I don't think Hayasaka-san will ever leave your side again. And deep down, what you truly desire is for her to always be by your side. Kaguya looked at Ren. She didn't respond. Instead, she silently took out the diary and spun the roulette wheel. She needed confirmation, a way to verify her true feelings. The wheel spun. Then, it stopped. One piece, just like last time, the pointer landed in the same section. Obtained devil fruit, door fruit, a strangely patterned pear-like fruit materialized in front of Kaguya Shinomiya. It was confirmed. This was the result she had wanted all along. Kaguya's emotions slowly settled. Ren, a person can only eat one devil fruit, right? Yeah, only one. Hey. Looks like the wish in my heart really was what you said. Realizing that Ren was right, Kaguya couldn't help but laugh softly. Then, she turned to the girl standing behind her. Hayasaka, eat it. Yes, Kaguya-sama. Without hesitation, Hayasaka opened her mouth and took a bite. The moment the fruit touched her tongue, a horrible, indescribable taste spread through her entire body. A wave of disgust surged through her, making her freeze on the spot. Now she understood. She finally understood why Kaguya's face had looked so twisted when she ate her own fruit. Eating this thing was like eating literal garbage. Even though her expression contorted in agony, even though her brows furrowed tightly in sheer disgust, Hayasaka forced herself to swallow. For her, this was torture. No. This was worse than torture. But she endured it. In just a few bites, the entire devil fruit was gone. Watching from the side, Chika couldn't help but ask curiously. Is Hayasaka suffering that much? Ren explained casually. Devil fruits grant powerful abilities, but their taste is absolutely disgusting. Ironically, despite their magical properties, their flavor is beyond horrible. Almost instinctively, Chika asked. How bad are we talking? It's like eating shit. Hiss. Chika visibly shuddered at the thought. She glanced at Hayasaka, who was still struggling to swallow. And suddenly, she could almost taste it herself. Instantly. All her envy vanished. Eating shit wasn't a joke. She suddenly respected Hayasaka a lot more. But then, she realized something. Wait. Didn't Kaguya eat a devil fruit before too? Didn't that mean Kaguya also ate shit? Chika's admiration for Kaguya shot through the roof. She really couldn't have done what Kaguya did. Chapter 127, The Gap Between Mystery and Reality. Hayasaka struggled to swallow the entire devil fruit, and as she did, a strange intuition surfaced within her. Instinctively, she activated the newfound power within her body. A circular door appeared in the void, pushed open by her hand. Using this ability for the first time, Hayasaka was momentarily stunned. Oh, it's the door fruit. Seeing the door open in thin air, Ren immediately recognized the ability. After all, the door fruit was an extremely rare devil fruit. It granted the ability to move through space, even enabling instant teleportation. Among all spatial abilities, this was one of the most terrifying. While the door fruit lacked direct offensive power, its mobility was unmatched. Especially since the user could hide in another dimension. Unless they opened the door themselves, there was almost no way to detect them. As for whether the door fruit had any combat potential, that would likely depend on its awakening. Hayasaka-san, that is the ability of the door fruit. By using it, you can open a door to another dimension identical to reality. Try stepping inside and take a look. Hayasaka hesitated slightly before nodding. Then, I'll give it a try. She stepped through the circular door. The moment she entered, the door closed behind her. She turned around. Kaguya-sama. Can't hear me? She tried calling out, but Kaguya, who was seated outside, showed no reaction. She really can't hear me. Just as she was about to test another theory, her gaze involuntarily shifted toward Ren. And in that instant, their eyes met. A chill ran down Hayasaka's spine. Was that a coincidence? She quickly shifted positions, only to realize something unsettling. No matter where she moved, Ren's gaze followed her. It's not a coincidence. Amamiya Ren can actually see me. She didn't understand why, but one thing was certain. He could perceive her in this dimension. But given how strange Ren was to begin with, she wasn't entirely surprised. Setting that thought aside, Hayasaka began observing this new world. It was identical to reality, except for one thing. The colors were different. Everything had a lighter tone, making it easier to distinguish from the real world. That's a good design. If this parallel dimension looked exactly like reality, navigating between the two would be confusing. But with these visual differences, she was certain she wouldn't get lost. This ability suits me perfectly. If I had this before, I could have uncovered all of Shinomiya Oko's secrets. It came a little late. What a pity. Just as she was lamenting this, Ren's voice suddenly rang out. Hayasaka-san, try picturing your room and opening a door to it. The door fruit also grants the ability to travel through space, give it a shot. Snapped out of her thoughts, Hayasaka turned to look at him. He's looking straight at me again. Feeling slightly uneasy, she still nodded in acknowledgement. She closed her eyes. My room. My room. Focusing on the image of her room, she activated the power she had just obtained. A circular door formed in the air. Taking a deep breath, she gently pushed it open. And beyond the doorway was her room. It actually worked. Hayasaka's eyes widened in disbelief. This was her first time using a supernatural power. But instead of stepping through immediately, she carefully observed her surroundings. Then, she noticed something interesting. The scene beyond the door was completely different from the hot spring hotel she was standing in. Beyond the doorway, it was as if she had already arrived at her room. So I can check my destination before stepping through. That's a useful feature. At last, Hayasaka fully understood something. Now she knew why Kaguya had been so eager to solve problems with power after obtaining her ability. Who wouldn't, after gaining something like this? Moreover, she was beginning to realize. The power she obtained was not inferior to Kaguya's. Maybe she couldn't freeze an entire RV like Kaguya. But she could instantly return from Tsukekaji Island to her room. This kind of spatial jump is even more terrifying than raw destructive power. And another unexpected advantage. Even in this parallel dimension, she could hear sounds from the real world and see people in it. Unless she opened a door back, no one would be able to detect her. Except, of course, for Ren. This ability is ridiculous. With this power, she could effortlessly steal any information without being noticed. This was the difference between mystery and reality. Hayasaka couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Until you obtain supernatural power, you can't truly comprehend the gulf between the mystical and the mundane. She was still a beginner. Yet even this level of power had already transformed her life. No wonder everyone desires the mystical. As Amamiya Ren once said, once you have power, it becomes easier to break past the limits of human nature. After a moment of reflection, Hayasaka closed the door leading to her room. However, the scene within the doorway remained unchanged. She quickly walked over, gently opened the door, and stepped into her room. Then, without hesitation, she created another door and immediately headed to Kaguya's room. Along the way, she saw maids cleaning, just like usual. These maids existed in a different dimension from her. None of them had Ren's ability to see her in this world. Because of that, she was able to move unnoticed. Arriving at Kaguya's room, she created another door back to reality. I actually made it back. To confirm her success, Hayasaka did one last thing. She walked straight to Kaguya's wardrobe, opened it, and took out a piece of Kaguya's personal clothing. Proof that she had traveled through space. Chapter 128, The Promise of Training Together. Taking Kaguya's personal clothing, she returned to the alternate dimension. But this time, behind the door was the main hall of the Tsukekaji Island Hot Spring Inn. With that step, she reopened the door, completing the spatial traversal from the Shinomiya residence to Tsukekaji Island. Kaguya-sama. You're back? Kaguya was, in fact, quite curious about the power Hayasaka had gained, especially after witnessing the unusual way she used it. However, Hayasaka didn't answer directly. Instead, she quietly presented a piece of cloth she was holding to Kaguya. What's this? Kaguya instinctively reached out to take it. Then, as the cloth unfolded completely, she saw what it was. A pair of pure white panties with cute butterfly ties. Kaguya's brain briefly short-circuited before her entire face turned red. At that moment, she nearly exerted her body's full strength, using unimaginable speed to shove the unfolded panties into her pocket. Although the observation skills of those present weren't at a Superman level, they were all fairly sharp, so they clearly caught a glimpse of the style. The only male present, Ren, also saw it clearly. However, to avoid embarrassment, he deliberately turned his gaze to the side. With her face burning, Kaguya glanced at Ren. Seeing that he had intentionally averted his gaze, she quickly suppressed her mortified emotions. Then, she shot a fierce glare at Hayasaka. "What's wrong with you? Weren't there other things you could have used as proof?" But Hayasaka simply turned her head away, pretending not to see Kaguya's glare. That deliberate movement nearly made Kaguya explode in anger. However, given that she had just had an embarrassing moment, she absolutely couldn't afford another one. Otherwise, she really wouldn't be able to face anyone. "Hayasaka, explain your ability." Left with no other choice, Kaguya changed the subject. Hayasaka pouted slightly but still began explaining. "The fruit I ate allows me to freely open doors to another dimension. That dimension is nearly identical to the real world, except the colors are slightly lighter, making it look somewhat different. In that alternate dimension, I can also open doors leading to other locations. Once a door is created, the space on the other side of the door will match the space where the door is set. I can also enter the door's connected space without needing to pass through a physical doorway. In that dimension, I can hear sounds and see actions from the real world, but I can't interfere with them. Likewise, people in the real world can't interfere with my dimension, unless I open a door connecting both worlds. This ability isn't as combat-oriented as Kaguya-sama's, but it has immense potential for transportation and intelligence gathering." Indeed. Just from Hayasaka's description alone, everyone present grasped the sheer utility of her ability. A spatial ability. Not only could it be used for spatial traversal, like instantly returning from Tsukekage Island to the Shinomiya residence in Tokyo, but it also had terrifying implications for reconnaissance and information gathering. And because it existed in a separate dimension, it was nearly undetectable. Besides transportation and intel gathering, Hayasaka-san, you could also explore ways to use it for confinement. If you can't transfer people, you might also be able to trap them in the alternate dimension for long-term sealing. Hayasaka's eyes lit up. That was indeed a viable strategy. While reconnaissance and movement were valuable, the ability to imprison someone indefinitely would greatly enhance her power's effectiveness. Amamiya, do you think that's possible? It should be. However, if you want to develop it further, like Shinomiya, you'll need extensive training. Ren paused for a moment before mentioning a crucial aspect of devil fruit abilities. Devil fruit powers can be further developed. If a devil fruit ability is trained to a certain extent, it undergoes a qualitative transformation. This transformation is known as awakening. When a devil fruit awakens, it unlocks a higher tier of power, allowing the user to wield their ability in an even more advanced way. But the stronger the ability, the harder it is to awaken. You should be mentally prepared for that challenge. Hayasaka found this reasoning quite sound. The more powerful a devil fruit ability, the harder it was to push it to its full potential. The power she had acquired wasn't something that could be easily mastered overnight. Ultimately, it all depended on fate. If the right opportunity arose, her ability might have a chance to evolve. But until then, Hayasaka felt she should follow Kaguya-sama's example and dedicate herself to serious training. Then, Ren made a suggestion to Kaguya. Shinomiya, now that Hayasaka also has the door fruit. You used to hold back in training your ability because you didn't want to attract attention, but now you can enter the space Hayasaka-san opens and train in the alternate dimension without anyone noticing. That's right. Kaguya's eyes immediately lit up. Her ice fruit ability had too large of an effective range. Every time she trained even a little, the entire pool at home would freeze over, which was far from an ideal training environment. But in another dimension, she wouldn't have to worry about being seen. She could even go anywhere within the alternate world and unleash her power freely. That's a great idea. Not only did Kaguya think so, but even Nagi agreed that the suggestion was fantastic. If the alternate world is unaffected by external factors, then there's no risk of drawing attention. Ever since I gained my vision, I haven't had a proper chance to test it out. This could be the perfect opportunity. Shinomiya, let's go together when we return. As she spoke, Nagi turned to look at the others. How about everyone else? Want to join in? I have a feeling that more of us might end up acquiring the diary later on. Kaguya also found Nagi's suggestion reasonable. She, too, suspected that other members of their group might receive the diary in the future. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for things to unfold. Chapter 129, The Avenger Who Didn't Avenge Herself Personally. The progress on Tsukekage Island was faster than expected. The villagers only learned about the village chief's drug production and trafficking when the investigation began the following day. That was also when they confirmed the existence of those dozens of corpses. Upon seeing the bodies, nearly all the villagers involved in the identification erupted in shock and fury. I never would have imagined. I always thought that old man never left Tsukekage Island his entire life. Why did he suddenly go outside in the end? The passing of the elderly was already tragic enough. These were people from the same generation, yet they were murdered in such a cruel manner. Seeing this, the older villagers felt an overwhelming sense of grief. The village chief they had elected had turned out to be the very murderer who killed their peers. And it wasn't just the elderly who died. Their children, sons and daughters-in-law, and even grandchildren who weren't yet 8 years old had all been killed in the same horrific way. That realization filled them with rage. Recalling the village chief's usual demeanor, as well as the worsening condition of the marine environment, the island's fishermen clenched their teeth in fury. They had known that the environmental damage was the village chief's doing. But they had originally assumed it was just industrial pollution, illegal waste disposal causing a massive die-off of fish in the surrounding waters. That was what they had been protesting against all this time. But now that they knew the truth, they were on the verge of passing out from sheer shock. The environmental impact of drug production lasted far longer than they had realized. Long before they could recover from the damage to the marine ecosystem, fishermen who relied on the sea, would have already starved to death. And the poppy fields discovered in the back mountains? Those plants could even alter the geological conditions of the area. If they contaminated the underground water supply, the consequences would be catastrophic. The scope of this disaster was massive. Even outsiders like Kogoro and Conan had caught wind of the situation. The village chief was actually running a drug trafficking operation. On top of that, he's involved in dozens of murder cases. Kogoro didn't even know how to respond. As far as he was concerned, these crimes all but guaranteed the death penalty. Life imprisonment? That wasn't even an option. There was no way a sentence like that could cover the weight of these crimes. The only possible verdict was execution. Ms. Asai. Mori shifted his attention, only to see that Dr. Asai had been staring blankly ever since hearing the news, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Ms. Asai. He raised his voice, snapping Narumi Asai out of her daze. Ah. Mr. Mori, did you need something? Do I need something? You look like you have a serious problem. Me? Ever since you heard about the village chief's crimes, your emotions have been all over the place. Narumi Asai let out a small breath of relief. Thankfully, that was all he had noticed. She couldn't control her emotions right now, but she forced herself to shake her head. It's just, I can't believe that such a large drug trafficking operation was hidden behind Tsukekage Island. And I never would have expected the village chief to be capable of something this outrageous. Seeing her shocked expression and the way she had been zoning out just now, Kogoro Mori couldn't really blame her. Who could remain calm after learning something like this? Dr. Asai, it's no wonder you're having a hard time processing this. After all, this is a major case. The Metropolitan Police Department wouldn't normally act this fast, unless they had already been keeping an eye on Tsukekage Island for a while. Conan, standing beside Mori, nodded in agreement. A large-scale operation like this had to have been in the works for quite some time. Tsukekage Island had likely been on the Metropolitan Police Department's radar for a while, and this operation had probably been in planning for months. Drug-related busts were always carried out with extreme precision. The task force was deployed with a clear objective, to take down the traffickers as swiftly as possible. They stormed both the village community center and the back mountains. Once the raid was complete, the criminal investigators moved in to gather evidence. The entire operation was executed swiftly and efficiently, completely unlike the sluggish response times usually seen in Tokyo. There was no doubt that this plan had been meticulously prepared. The goal was to catch the drug dealers off guard, which was why the raid resulted in a near-total annihilation of the armed traffickers and the successful capture of all major leaders. Come to think of it, the letter that had requested Uncle Mori's help earlier was that also related to the discovery of the drug traffickers. Conan found that possibility highly likely. Especially after learning that the supposed client had actually died over a decade ago. Uncle Mori, do you think that person had already discovered the truth about Tsukekage Island? Could it be that Seiji Asa's death more than 10 years ago was also connected to the village chief? Was the client trying to lead you toward the case from back then? That's a real possibility. Kogoro had to admit, Conan's theory made sense. The client paid the commission fee in advance and even used the name of Seiji Asa, who's been dead for over a decade. And considering all the village chief's crimes, it's possible that Seiji Asa was killed back then because of the drug trade. Someone must have recently found evidence of the village chief's operations and used a fake name to hire me for the investigation. Listening to all of this, Narumi Asai felt conflicted. The reasoning was sound. The conclusion was correct. But the problem was, She had originally planned to take matters into her own hands. Yet, in the end, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police had handled everything. They struck with overwhelming force, wiping out the entire drug operation in one decisive blow. The village chief and all key figures were now in custody. There was nothing left for her to do. The task force and the investigators had done everything she had wanted to do, and they had done it legally and justifiably. That left her feeling strangely empty. But wasn't this a good thing? It should be a good thing. Even though the outcome and process had deviated completely from her original plan, the fact remained: the major drug traffickers had been caught. And dozens of hidden murder cases had been brought to light. Most importantly, she had gotten her revenge without having to stain her own hands or end up in prison. From an objective standpoint, everything had turned out perfectly. Aside from her personal feelings of awkwardness, there was nothing to complain about. So, in the end, it was best that no one found out she was the one who had sent that letter. Chapter 130, Family. Outside the port around 4 p.m., the return ship had already docked at the port. By the time they arrived, a large group of people was already waiting outside. Kaguya-sama. Hayasaka Nao had known about this trip in advance and had been waiting at the port early. You really do keep up with things, Aunt Nao. Kaguya had originally hoped that no one would find out about what happened during this weekend trip. But now, it seemed impossible to keep it a secret. The Metropolitan Police Department contacted us as soon as the incident occurred, Hayasaka Nao said, visibly relieved after confirming Kaguya's safety. Yesterday's police notification had given her quite a scare. If it weren't for the need to avoid unnecessary communication and prevent alarming the drug traffickers, she would have insisted on intervening immediately. I never expected that a simple vacation would turn into something like this, Nao sighed, feeling a headache coming on. Letting Kaguya relax on a weekend getaway was fine, but running into drug traffickers was beyond unfortunate. Even she hadn't anticipated such a scenario. Kaguya-sama, next time you go out, we may need to arrange a higher level of security to ensure you won't encounter such incidents again. Aunt Nao, that won't be necessary. This isn't about inconvenience, it's about your safety. Seeing Nao's serious expression, Kaguya had no choice but to sigh in resignation. She truly regarded Nao as family. She didn't mind her concerns. After all, it was only natural for an elder to worry. Perhaps, she should have a conversation with Nao. Kaguya was beginning to think it was necessary. Nagi-sama. A loud voice rang out, and an elderly butler with white hair and a beard rushed over. At the sight of the always composed Nagi and Maria stepping back several paces, Kaguya couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Nagi-sama, you must take me with you next time you go out. No way. If I bring you along, I won't be able to have any fun. Her firm rejection left the old butler completely frozen in place. Oh my. You really caused a commotion this time, dragging me into all this. Huh? Nagi scowled at the approaching figure, displeased. Klaus was already an eyesore, and now this woman was here too. She had an irritating tendency to notice things she shouldn't. And worse, she was a blabbermouth. For that reason, Nagi didn't want her knowing too much. So, why are you here, Sakuya? Why do you think? Aizawa Sakuya crossed her arms, looking down at Nagi with a reproachful expression. You made such a huge mess that Grandpa had to contact me personally. If he hadn't told me, I wouldn't have believed you'd stir up this much trouble. Sakuya had always been aware of Nagi's antics. She would occasionally visit and check on her, keeping an eye on her unstable tendencies. But this time, she had just returned from a trip abroad, only to receive a call from her grandfather. He told her that Nagi had transferred to another school and even dragged Izumi along with her. When she heard the news, Sakuya could already picture Takabana Wataru crying under his blanket. But she set that aside for now. The bigger issue was Nagi and Izumi. Sakuya couldn't understand why Nagi-sama suddenly wanted to transfer schools or why she managed to convince Izumi to go with her. More importantly, why did Grandpa approve it? And to top it off, Nagi chose an island for her weekend vacation. One with drug traffickers lurking about. She couldn't believe Nagi's luck. Of all the places she could have gone, she somehow ended up in the middle of a crime scene. Also, we need to have a serious talk about the two of you. Sakuya was determined to get answers. She needed to know what had been going on with Nagi lately. Why had she transferred schools? Why had she dragged Izumi with her? And why had Grandpa agreed to it? The more she thought about it, the more she felt like something was off, like there was an important secret hidden behind all this. Sis, why are you here? While the others were being greeted by their families, Sanoko was no exception. The person who had came to pick her up was her older sister, Suzuki Ayako. What do you mean, why? Ayako rolled her eyes at her sister. You have no idea, the business and political worlds have been in chaos for the past 2 days. Several high-profile young ladies, who influenced the future of Japan's economy, ran into drug traffickers on a weekend trip. If anything had happened to you, it would have been a disaster. Sis, you're exaggerating. Even if something happened to us, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Exaggerating? Ayako scoffed. Let me break it down for you. The Shinomiya family just completed their internal restructuring, and Shinomiya Kaguya is now the confirmed future heir. The Shinomiya conglomerate controls industries spanning heavy industry, light industry, and even food production. If something happened to Kaguya, the Shijo family would immediately make a move, and the resulting conflict could shake the entire business world. And then there's the Sanzan-in family. They just officially recognized Nagi as the heir a few days ago. If anything happened to her, it would throw the entire Sanzan-in empire into turmoil. Then there's the Fujiwara family. They're in politics. Her grandfather is a former prime minister, and her other grandfather is still in the cabinet. Her father and uncle are current provincial ministers, and her mother is the head of the diplomatic corps. If something happened to Fujiwara, do you really think it wouldn't cause a massive stir? For the past 2 days, the business and political sectors have been in complete disarray because of you all. Dad told me that the top brass at the Metropolitan Police Department received multiple calls from the cabinet, and they've been in meetings ever since. Wait, it was that serious? For the first time, Sanoko truly grasped just how much influence their group wielded. Chapter 131, See you on Monday. But it seemed that our background wasn't the only factor exerting influence. Sanoko couldn't help but think about the situation within the club. Especially those who had obtained the diary and were already taking strides into the supernatural world. Even without considering their backgrounds, the power they gained from the diary alone was enough to give them extraordinary influence. However, mysteries were best kept secret, and they had no interest in showing off. Thinking about Kaguya's extraordinary abilities and how her maid could travel through space, such things were simply unimaginable in the real world. But on the surface, Sanoko still waved her hand nonchalantly. It's not that bad, not that bad. We were just unlucky this time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ended up on an island used as a drug dealer's base during a weekend trip. Yes, this was indeed just bad luck. They had only planned a short trip to an island hot spring near Tokyo, yet they had stumbled upon a drug cartel's hideout. The odds of such a thing happening were ridiculously low. Ayako also felt that the biggest issue here was with the Metropolitan Police Department. With so many drug dealers and addicts operating near Tokyo, could the Metropolitan Police Department really have been unaware? They must have known. The police would have received intel about this long ago. Drugs weren't like ordinary contraband. Once they entered the city, they would inevitably attract attention. After all, drugs required both buyers and sellers, and their distribution couldn't be completely concealed. Even if kept secret initially, word would eventually leak, reaching people who would unknowingly spread it further, until it inevitably reached the ears of the Metropolitan Police Department. That meant official agencies were always the first to know about such matters. However, their focus wasn't just on the dealers, they also needed to track the suppliers. That required setting traps. Hence, delays in action. Even so, Ayako felt that the Metropolitan Police had dragged this out for far too long. So long, in fact, that her sister and her friends managed to take a vacation before the police finally made their move. But there was no point in saying anything now. The incident had already happened and was already over. Some words were better left unspoken. From now on, you might have restrictions on going out. Sanoko, however, wasn't at all fazed by her sister's warning. Not really, sister. You're overthinking it. This time, their discovery of the drug cartel had only happened because Ren detected the presence of an evil spirit. It was an event determined by divination, a method beyond normal understanding. The likelihood of trouble finding them in the future was indeed high. But the probability of them actually being harmed was still quite low. Not to mention Ren. Even the others were gradually becoming far from ordinary. The effectiveness of conventional means against them was diminishing. And that arrogant brat, Sanzan-in, even suggested going to another dimension to train together. How could she pass up such an opportunity? Missing it would be a lifelong regret. Besides, she hadn't forgotten. Once she obtained the diary, she could go on a date with Ren. That was far more important to her than getting the diary itself. Before Ayako could react, her sister had already wrapped her arms around her. Ren, let's go together. Auntie Ray's place is pretty far from here. I'll give you a ride back. Ren, who had always been well taken care of like this, didn't hesitate. Sorry to trouble you, Ayako-san. No worries, it's on the way. Ayako knew Ren well and had always liked her. She was gentle and had a great personality. She was also her sister's childhood friend. There were no financial interests tying them together. Their friendship had been pure from the very beginning. Ayako even thought that if her sister had been a boy, she and Ren might have ended up together. Unfortunately, her sister was just a tomboy, not an actual guy. What a pity. Ren and I are heading off first. Ren? Because of this, Ayako took a closer look at the boy. Let's go, sister. Hey, wait a minute, Sanoko. Before she could even read the situation properly, her sister had already pulled her away. Once Ayako and Sanoko left, the crowd at the port thinned significantly. Nagi walked toward Ren with Izumi in tow. She gave a slight bow. Thank you for this time, Amamiya. This was your own wish. There's no need to thank me. No, my wish was only part of it. My wish alone wasn't enough. Nagi understood this all too well. A wish was just an obsession. No matter how strong it was, without the right medium, it was meaningless. This thank you was necessary. The one-star Dragon Ball embedded within the vision was the perfect token of gratitude. Ren didn't refuse and instead turned his gaze toward Daizawa Sakuya, who was standing beside them. Your nosy sister, you should think carefully before telling her anything. Also, let me give you a heads up, your sister is going to become a priestess, working mainly as Izumi's assistant. This girl? Nagi looked up at Sakuya in surprise. Izumi actually picked this blabbermouth as her assistant? Although she complained about it, deep down, she believed it. Who are you calling a blabbermouth? Sakuya wasn't quite sure what was going on, but she did understand that she had just been insulted. And who are you, anyway, kid? This is the first time I've ever seen Nagi act so polite towards someone. Sakuya was genuinely curious about this high school boy that Nagi had gone out of her way to thank. It was the first time she had seen the usually tsundere Nagi bow to a boy without a hint of her usual attitude. But Ren had no intention of satisfying Sakuya's curiosity. Well then, Sanzanin, Seijinamiya, see you on Monday. Yeah, see you on Monday. Chapter 132, Chika, Kaguya, Land Mihai Asaka sitting in the car, Aizawa Sakuya's silver-gray eyes locked onto the three people in front of her. You three. Shouldn't you explain things to me? Nagi, under her gaze, snorted and crossed her arms. Why should I tell you anything? Because if you don't, I'll pester you non-stop until you do. Nagi almost lost her temper. But she had to think carefully about the situation because this person really could be annoying. Annoyed, she couldn't help but grumble. This is all Amamiya's fault. Why did you have to say all that in front of her? Maria, sitting beside her, shook her head slightly. Nagi-chan, your behavior with Miss Izumi has completely piqued Miss Sakuya's interest. I think even if Mr. Amamiya hadn't mentioned anything, Miss Sakuya would still have dug into it sooner or later. She's not the type to let go of a mystery that easily. Maria also felt the need to remind Nagi of something. Your grandfather already knows what happened to you on Tsukekage Island. There are some things he needs to understand, otherwise, he will be worried. TSK, that old man too. Nagi clicked her tongue in frustration. But there was no way to hide it from her grandfather. Given what they knew about Amamiya, her grandfather was also someone who pursued the so-called royal authority. That damn old man must know about supernatural things. The only question was whether or not he had figured out what had happened to her yet. Maybe he had already guessed but was just waiting for her to say it herself. Nagi-chan, Grandpa is someone who seeks out the unknown. He understands the supernatural better than anyone. Mr. Amamiya also said as much. So no matter how much you try to hide it, there are some people you just can't keep secrets from forever. Izumi, what do you think? Maria then turned to Izumi. Izumi stared at Sakuya for a long time before finally speaking. Sakuya might be unreliable in some areas, but what she's best at is taking care of people. She's always been considerate of Nagi-chan's feelings, especially when Nagi is upset. Even though her cold jokes aren't funny at all and tend to kill the mood, Sakuya would never reveal something carelessly. As she listened to this evaluation, Sakuya felt a pang in her heart. Her jokes weren't funny at all. They killed the mood. Each word felt like a knife stabbing into her soul. At that moment, Sakuya felt her breath hitch. The blood in her face was rushing so fast that her whole face turned slightly red. Izumi, you're really not holding back at all, huh? Well, Miss Izumi hit Miss Sakuya right in her weak spot. Huh? The one who landed the critical hit looked confused, not understanding why Nagi and Maria were saying that. I didn't hit Sakuya at all. No critical hit? Nagi and Maria both turned to look at Sakuya, who was now completely red. Her face was flushed, the veins on her forehead were twitching, and she showed clear signs of high blood pressure. If this wasn't a critical hit, then what was? Seeing Sakuya's expression, Nagi figured it was better to just tell her the truth. Her grandfather already knew. And this nosy woman was shameless. If she didn't say anything, something irreversible might happen. After struggling internally for a moment, Nagi made her decision. Fine. We'll talk about it when we get back. Meanwhile, in another car, a similar conversation was taking place. Kaguya, please lend me Hayasaka. Chika clasped her hands together in a pleading gesture. Kaguya remained expressionless. You're planning to confront your family this soon? Well, I don't really have a choice. Having her thoughts exposed so easily, Chika's face twisted into a bitter expression, far from her usual lively and playful self. This whole situation has gotten out of control. If I don't tell my father and grandfather soon, I probably won't be allowed to leave home anymore. Ideally, she would have liked to tell them at a more appropriate time. But time wasn't on her side. If she didn't act now, her father and grandfather would make sure she never had the chance to speak up in the future. Right now, Chika knew, the key to obtaining that diary in the future was Ren. If she lost the ability to go out freely, how would she ever find a way to surprise her father and grandfather? It was almost inevitable that they would try to lock her down. For someone who had already caught a glimpse of something interesting but couldn't reach it, that kind of situation would be pure torment. To avoid that outcome, Chika had only one option: she needed to give her father and grandfather an ultimatum before they could trap her. Kaguya considered it for a moment before nodding slightly. Hayasaka, go with Fujiwara. I understand, Kaguya-sama. Hayasaka nodded slightly and opened a shimmering doorway in midair. Miss Fujiwara, please step in. Okay. Sitting in the back seat, Chika immediately leaped up, stepping through the door and vanishing into another dimension. Hayasaka followed right after. The doorway closed behind them. Two people had disappeared from the car. Nao, who was driving, felt like her worldview had just shattered. She had just watched Chika and her own daughter disappear into thin air. Aunt Nao, today is a rare weekend. Contact Uncle Masato later. We'll have a family gathering at my house tonight. A weekend dinner. Nao took a deep breath, then nodded slightly. I understand, Ms. Kaguya. After calming down, Nao started to piece things together. Now, she understood why Kaguya had such a strong connection with Sanzanin. It all came down to this. And now, little by little, they were beginning to uncover the truth. Nao, whose worldview had just been shattered, quickly composed herself. At this moment, she demonstrated the impeccable professionalism of a top-tier maid. Chapter 133, Why Am I Always Scapegoated? At this moment, inside the Fujiwara household, a grandfather, a maternal grandfather, an uncle, parents, and sisters were all waiting. Dad, shouldn't we go pick her up? Fujiwara Daiki, always the cautious one, voiced his concern. But the next second, his father shot him a stern glare, making him freeze in place, not daring to move. Chika ran into this mess today, this is all your responsibility as her father. With a single sentence, the old man pushed all the blame onto his son without hesitation. Dad, but Chika transferring schools and going out this weekend was all because you. Smack. The old man slammed the table, his stern face dark with irritation. You brat. Are you saying this is all my fault? Isn't it, though? Fujiwara Daiki grumbled internally but kept a cautious expression on his face. From past experience, he knew better than to argue, so he tried to shift the blame. Dad, what I meant was. Shouldn't Chika? Bang. This time, it was Chika's maternal grandfather who slammed the table. How is any of this my granddaughter's fault? Son-in-law, are you trying to push responsibility onto my Chika? Don't you agree, in-laws? Absolutely. Without hesitation, the old man sided with his in-law. Chika is still young, of course she's playful. But you? You're a grown man. Can you really be compared to Chika? Daiki felt a deep sense of injustice. An old father and an old father-in-law, whenever his daughter caused trouble, he was always the one sacrificed as the scapegoat. Meanwhile, the actual troublemaker, Chika, was treated with utmost care and affection, without exception. Exactly. Can Dad really be compared to me? The two old men were about to nod in agreement. Then suddenly froze. Wait. When did their granddaughter get back? They hadn't gone to pick her up, and they had been waiting for the Shinomiya family to send her home. So how had she arrived so quickly? Just as the two old men were puzzling over this, a circular portal suddenly materialized in the air before everyone's eyes. A direct assault on their common sense. As the entire Fujiwara family stood in stunned silence, Chika stepped through the portal with her luggage in tow. There was no subtlety, no restraint, just a blatant, reality-defying event meant to shake them to their core. The so-called mystery had been unveiled right in front of them. What the hell? Is this really my daughter? Fujiwara Daiki completely abandoned his usual composure, nearly swearing out loud. How did my daughter just walk out of thin air? At that moment, his mind was in complete chaos. The two grandfathers, having experienced much in life, were the first to recover. And despite the shock, they weren't particularly opposed to their granddaughter's involvement in mysterious matters. Especially now that the truth was right in front of them. Chika, you're back. Did you have fun this weekend? The old man's smile was as warm as the early spring sun. Well, I saw some things I really wish I hadn't. But overall, it was a valuable experience. I'd say it was a good learning opportunity for me. Chika gave a simple summary of her trip. Miss Fujiwara. Before anyone could respond, Hayasaka stepped through the portal behind her. She bowed politely to the elders. Excuse me. In order to return Miss Fujiwara home as quickly as possible, we employed some unconventional methods. The two old men were momentarily speechless. Unconventional was an understatement. This was enough to give someone a heart attack. It's fine. As long as Chika is home safely, that's what matters. The old man's expression was no longer imposing. He now looked like any ordinary grandfather. But those who knew him well understood that, except when dealing with his granddaughter, his presence was always commanding. Yet, after witnessing something beyond human comprehension,